And so have you got power back on, Nova? Other than generator?
Say that again?
I say, have you got power back, hydropower back on rather than generator?
No, and I don't know what or when.
Yeah, okay. It shows on the hydro map that we looked at yesterday or whatever, there were four outages on Quadra, and we had about, I don't know, half a dozen or so. Some of them quite extensive. Canberra's got a pile of them too.
Yeah, I hear the whole island's out, and I don't even know if it's on this side or the other.
Even Oyster River's out, down by the store by Discovery Foods, and they usually Area D doesn't go out because we have the substation on York Road that you know kicks in when we usually never lose power, but I was getting calls at 4 o'clock yesterday from the Oyster River area on Lambeth roadside saying they were out of power from 9:30 till 4. And so I called the hydro emergency line, and they said they had them flagged on their emergency, you know,
right.
call out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
okay.
I never lost it.
Okay, so we're at 9:30. So let's go ahead and call this Electoral Area Service Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of December 7th to order. And I assume we have a quorum. We got to talk to everybody so far. So according to the script, it says the purpose of the meeting is to permit consideration of matters listed on the agenda below, and where appropriate to provide recommendations to the board. Recommendation. Could I have a question first of Tom? Do the recommendations from this meeting, they will go to the board, I assume, and then the vote at the board is electoral areas or board?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, yes, any recommendations that the committee makes today would go to the board at the first available opportunity. As to who would vote at the board, it would depend on the item and what the nature of the recommendation is. Some services, of course, are single participant where the whole board would vote. Others may be shared between electoral areas only, and so really would depend on the specifics of the recommendation being made.
Okay, so shared, it's EAs, unshared, or single participant, it's the whole board.
Typically, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have a question on that. Do we have an opportunity at the committee or, well, at the board, I guess, to discuss the big shared services like electoral area administration and planning and GIS, IT services and all that? Do we have a chance to consider those budgets before the final budget is drawn up in the new year?
Well, Mr. Chair, yeah, Mr. Chair, the draft budget will be in late January, which will have all year-end and assessments there. But again, we've included the opportunity to talk about shared service at our East meeting when we talked about an additional planner, but you're happy to talk about that today as well if you want.
So that ship has sailed. We already did that, right? We talked about the planning department, but I don't recall talking about electoral area administration. I don't recall that.
No, now the financial plan outlines things that are over and above base financial planning. So things that directors want to add, delete, or things that staff want to. So the board has adopted a base budget, but here today you're happy to talk about shared services. By all means, I think Director Anderson has an item on shared services. So EA admin is one of those.
Okay. Jim, can I just ask a process question before we start too?
Okay, go ahead, Nova.
Thank you. My understanding is that the reason that we created this meeting, as well as another special meeting I'm gathering we're having in January, is based on a motion that was unanimously passed by us in September. Just to reference, it says that 2 EASC meetings be added to the budget meeting schedule. This is when we are adopting the budget meeting calendar for substantive EASC budget discussions, which would both allow early and meaningful input to the budget, which would allow substantive budget amendments, most notably for the purposes of joint planning function. So my experience normally in the last 13 years I've been here, with the exception of last year and maybe the last 2 years, I didn't go back and take a look 2 years ago, was we didn't really get a chance to have early meaningful discussion around our shared services, including planning and EA admin and those things that Brenda's bringing up. So that's really was my anticipation of what we were doing here today, as well as creating an opportunity to discuss individual rural budget services. So 2 questions through to the CFO or CAO. One is, what base budget are we speaking from? Because I know in exchange with the CFO after my one-on-one meeting, he had indicated that when the first draft budget came out, then we'd have numbers to refer to. So prior to that, or if that has come out, I'm not aware of it, are we referencing the 2021 budget that was adopted? Because I see in Jim's submissions that there's suggested amendments to the budget, but I don't even know what that base is, because to my knowledge we haven't received any budget at all this year yet in these discussions.
Right.
And then
Simply, it's the 2021 budget. This is all planning for 2022. So when we say base budget, we're referring to the 2021 base budget.
Great. Okay, that's useful. So I would have hoped and expected that would have been up on the agenda for us to all reference. I certainly have a printed copy and we can go find it on the website. But my experience is in budget meetings, we have a budget, however, whatever iteration, to look at and collectively reference, and perhaps a little bit of a presentation from staff on that budget. So then the second question.
I'm not sure why staff would present a 2021 budget. We have gone through meeting on the 2021 budget. There's no reason for staff to repeat a presentation on the 2021 adopted budget. This is a meeting called by the EA directors. Staff have nothing to support. We're here to take notes, directions, but we don't have anything to add to the financial planning meetings prior to the draft budget. We have all the information we need. So
then we should be talking about what we want to do with the 2022 budget. Is that correct, Dave?
With respect,
I'm sorry, Nova. Just a second, Nova. Is that correct, Dave? I couldn't hear you.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not asking for a presentation on the 21 budget, but usually in budget discussions, there's something that we can all look at together. So we can all go and find the 2021 budget, but it would have been very supportive if that had been on the agenda, so that we could just pull the EA joint budget services and be able to bring them up and look at them all together. Because if we want to make suggestions on EA admin or planning or anything else, it would be great to be able to look at that together. That's really my primary point. And then my second question was, I get a conflicting information about an individual director not being able to give input to the budget because they have no control on their own. It's the board that adopts the budget. But when we gave input at the one-on-one meetings, I'm not clear how that then translates into the budget. In previous years, the direction that was given at the one-on-one meetings come back in form of resolution, and that direction then gets formally resolved by the committee and then the board to be incorporated into the budget, and that's a way of formalizing what happens at those one-on-ones. So I'm wondering if that's coming forward, or how we enshrine in the budget that good input that was given. And then a lot of the early iterative discussions in November before we see any budget at all in those one-on-ones is much more discussion. It's not final direction. Because, for instance, I haven't seen the fire department's budget or the final hall budget or various other things. And so
We
I
just did that
anticipate
at the one.
and
What do you mean you
expect-
haven't? Well, we brought the fire hall and the community hall to the one-on-one meeting. What do you mean you haven't seen the budget?
Well, I've seen the 2021, but I haven't seen the input yet offered for the 2022 budget from those respective.
We just did that at the one-on-ones. We brought the hall, presented their budget, and the fire department did not choose to present. I'm confused.
Yeah, so I have not yet seen a budget proposal from the fire department, which is fine. When it arrives, that will be more information for me to then have substantive discussion and direct that particular budget. So I'm just asking where in this budget process, because this is very different budget process that I'm used to. And I'm trying
Mr. Chair, it's not different. Director Anderson keeps going. We've been doing the same template for many years. It's not different. I'll remind you.
Well, let's not debate that one again.
Yeah.
Well,
Mr. Chair, Mike has his hand up. I know you can't see him, so he has his
Okay,
hand.
Mike, go ahead.
So yeah, I was just going to say at the budget, the fire department's just said 5% increase. And then to your last question, when we went through that meeting, we took notes on some various changes, like what we want to see in the reserve, some of the grants and aid and whatnot. So I just carried that through into the draft budget. So you should see those amounts. And then when we begin the budget deliberations in the new year, you should see all that reflected in the budget, and then I'll make applicable notes for it. So that's what I have, how I've incorporated the notes so far. Thanks.
And that's on the 2022 budget, and we would have an opportunity to have input into those numbers. Is that correct?
Well,
Yeah. So
you've had input into them. So what we'll do is we'll consolidate all of that information along with year-end numbers and new assessments and show you what the outcomes of those are. If there are things at that point where you're not happy with, then that's your opportunity to give further direction to make changes.
Okay, well, that's the point that I was asking, is we will have the opportunity, if things have changed or whatever in our electoral areas, we will have further input or opportunity for input into the 2022 budget at that time. Is that correct?
At this point, all we're doing is planning it. It's useless to look at numbers that we don't know assessments in year ends at yet. So we're taking input, we're taking direction, resolutions, we're throwing that all into the pot. And when we consolidate all those and see what they tangibly mean to you in terms of tax requisitions, we present that and identify the things you brought forward. And that's an opportunity. Once you see what it tangibly means, an opportunity for you to make changes if you so wish.
And
that would be in January.
Yeah, it's in January. But I mean, regional districts, all you can do is talk about changes, additions, modifications, plan towards 2022 until you get year-end numbers and assessments. Up till then, you're just working off the 2021 budget and providing input. We'll consolidate that, and then you can see the results of that consolidation in a draft budget.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. No, but you want to finish up so we can call the meeting to order?
Yeah, that'd be great. And so I'm just wanting super clarity on what will be the moments for this committee and individual rural area directors to have substantive input. Because with respect, Mr. Leach, my experience is that the budget process has changed, and I'm really wanting to make sure that there are substantive opportunities for us to modify the budget. And so that's why these extra 2 meetings have been offered or asked for. And so what I would hope that we are doing primarily today is discussing our shared services, which planning, which we haven't done. Director Lee alluded to a discussion, but that was a business case proposal from staff. It wasn't the overall planning budget. And we have the VERL and EA admin and then there's the liquid waste. Those are ones that we all share. And so I would appreciate it if today we could actually go through those and have the budget up in front of us and have meaningful discussion on those. And I would have anticipated, given the direction from the board in September, that that would have been our agenda rather than needing to populate from individual directors.
Okay. All right, so we will move on now to calling the meeting to order.
Move
so done.
adoption of the public agenda.
Second.
Okay. And on the adoption of the public agenda, I do have a couple of, if I can change computers here, I have a couple of additions, or whatever you want to call them.
Ditto.
So there's no sense in me going through them all now. I'll just say I have some amendments to the Area C budget items for 2022 to throw out for consideration. And that would be my input to adoption of the public agenda.
And I would like to add to the adoption of the public agenda, which is what I assumed we were here to do, was actually discuss rural shared services. So I would like the first item of business, as directed in the September board meeting, to be discussion of rural shared services. And if we can have those budgets in front of us to discuss from, that would be very useful. So I would so move that item 1 be discussion of rural shared services, of which there are 4, I believe.
Is there a seconder?
Planning, EA admin.
Sure,
That's-
I'll second.
Okay, moved, seconded by Director Lee. Any opposed? Okay, that carries. Now on the adoption of the amended public agenda,
Move-
unless there's others.
Move the agenda as amended.
Okay, seconder.
Yeah, I thought yep, second.
Second, Anderson. Anyone opposed? Still can't get used to the all in favor, not in favor. Okay, so, excuse me. Petitions and delegations, we have none. Business items, we have electoral area A items as, okay, just hang on a sec. So, no, but in your adoption, in the adoption of the amended agenda, did you say that the rural service one was going to be item number 1? Is that what you said?
Yes, as it was my understanding that that was the primary reason for this meeting. Yeah.
Okay, so then I guess we would have to take that, since we adopted it, we would have to take that as item number 1. So if you'd like to lead off on that and tell us what it is you're talking about.
Well, when I just look at the budget binder, the financial plan from 2021 to 2025, there is a section in this binder that is called Electoral Area Services, and there's 4 functions: 130, which is EA admin, 340, which is liquid waste, 500, which is planning, and 630, which is the Vancouver Island Library. And my experience and memory is that we have had opportunity, the 4 of us, to discuss these shared services. And so I'm just looking to retain that capacity. And I would ask that staff bring up the base budget, which I guess is the 2021 budget, for those 4 services, and walk us through what is being proposed, if there are any changes anticipated for 2022, and give this committee a substantive opportunity to discuss them and make any suggested changes.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll just jump in again and remind the committee of any changes above base budget we would have brought to the committee. So we have not brought changes. So what you see in the base budget is what we're proposing moving forward without any changes other than what the board considers it would be a base, let's say a 2% lift on some items in there, but we're not proposing any changes. So
Okay,
that's why we
that's-
haven't done any. So if you have any, if you have discussion, happy to staff to listen to it, but staff don't have anything to deliver to the committee because we're not proposing any changes to it.
Okay, so that's
great. Then
informative.
could
That's
bring up-
informative. Excuse me, Nova. That's informative for us to know that staff do not have any changes proposed and that they're in there already. Anything
Yeah, we
have
proposed,
proposed.
Mr. Chair, we proposed the additional planner, which the committee didn't support. So that was
Yes.
to shared services, the only thing we proposed. So again, staff don't have anything.
Okay, so if directors do have something though, then
Yeah,
this
bring it
would
up.
be the
Yeah,
place. This would be the
Absolutely.
place to bring it up.
absolutely.
So could we see on our screen then the budget detail for those 4 services so we could discuss them?
And could I also ask, while we're asking things, since I can't see a screen and I can't get to my financial plan online, I do have a hard copy in front of me. So if you could just give me a page number when you do go to any page, whatever it may be. If you could just tell me the page number and I can flip to that page and have a look at it while you're looking at it. I would appreciate that. Thank you. So on your question, Noma, you've asked for which one to be brought up?
Well, we only have 4. So if we're going in numerical order, the first is EA admin, function 130. It's on page 17 of my budget detail that was provided last year in the 2021 financial plan. And if we
Presumably-
could have it on the screen, then we can all have something that we can look at, presuming Jim can see the same thing.
I'm presuming you've reviewed this budget and you have an item you'd like to discuss. Maybe it might be easier just you can highlight the item you have identified.
No, that's not the case. In my experience and memory in reviewing is that generally, and I don't want to get into a debate with you on this, CAO, but my experience is that generally we have an opportunity to discuss our budget, those of us that are in control of the budget. And I'm just trying to find an opportunity to do so. We have had the budget detail up. We've gone through it. We've been able to ask questions. Staff have suggested why it is the way it is. And we have a moment to be empowered to know what's happening, as opposed to just have it rolled into a budget that we adopt without our discussion.
Okay, if we could pause there for 1 second before we go into discussion. On page 17, I'm looking at executive summary of municipalities. So,
Jim, you need
Mike,
to look
maybe
at
you
page
can,
61.
page 61, okay.
Okay, I have to go upstairs and grab my financial plan 2021 thing. I'll be right back.
Mike, would it be possible to bring up the budget detail
Thank you, Mike.
from function 130 for 2021 budget?
Apologies there, I was muted. Yeah, did you want me to take over the screen? Tom or Dave?
Sure.
Or I could send a link as well if you wanted to run it. That second one's the budget there.
So you're going to put page 61 up on the screen. Is that what's happening?
Just
Yeah,
share-
okay, I'll do it.
Just share screen, Mike, and you take control of it.
Just trying to find the
So the 61 in the financial plan has a summary of function 130, but then page 17 in the supplemental ledger actually has all the detail that historically I've been used to us collectively referring to.
sorry, I hit the request control button. I don't know if that's coming up or not.
17. See, I'm not following you now, but I've got, page 17 is not what you're saying it is, so.
Jim, do you have
I got it
the
figured out here.
actual budget detail anywhere? Like we used to, we received a whole big binder of all the VATM stuff.
Oh yeah, I've got like I don't know, 200 pages of budget here. Is that what we're talking about?
So can you find function 130, which is
I'm
EA
on
admin?
function 130, EA admin, electoral area services, page 61, as Mike said.
Sorry, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
But Jim,
Everybody except me.
what Mike is showing is much more detail than your page 61. Your page 61 is kind of a pretty version with blue and green and
Yep.
just has maybe 5 or 6 lines of information. Whereas the VATM budget detail that we're used to looking at has maybe 15 lines of additional breakdown to that function,
Jim probably doesn't have the supplemental ledger detail.
which was only given to me at request after our budget process was terminated last year.
Okay, well, I can't, speak to something that was given to you but not given to me. So,
Sorry, Director Abram, there's a link in the chat there. You could just pop it open on your computer if you like.
I can't. I cannot get on to Teams at all. So, there is no chat. There's nothing. When I go to join, click here to join the meeting, and then it gives me a screen that says, would you like to allow? Yes. Okay, I do that. And then the Teams logo comes up in a little box.
I just sent the link to your ExploreNet address.
I think his power's out, Mike. That's why you can't. I don't think he can power his computer on.
Yeah, I've got power, but
okay.
It's just
No internet.
Director Abram, can you receive your
obviously
emails?
it affected the internet, but I'm able to have our SRD page open. Like with working with John, we got that to open. So I can go on the SRD page and I can scroll up and down and I can see my notes and all that kind of stuff. But
Can
when I
you
go to
check your
Teams,
email?
when I check my email, it tells me cannot send messages, try again later.
If I could make a suggestion, Jim, perhaps if Nova has a specific line item in mind, she could just tell us what it is.
Yeah, I agree, Gerald. The EA admin is to support the directors and salaries, benefits, support services, travel, insurance, yada, yada, yada. If there's something that Director Anderson specifically has identified in the budget that has been available to all the directors for the last 300 days, that might be simpler.
I don't have an agenda about myself trying to make substantive budget changes. What I'm trying to do is empower this committee again to take a look at this budget, because in the past we have had substantive discussions about the travel item or how much we're going to have available to us in expenses or these kinds of things. And unless we have this opportunity, we can't even have those discussions. So this is just really trying to create a moment for us to know our budget again.
Well, you certainly don't need at the moment. It's available to you all year long. So if there's something that has stuck out, it might be easier. I mean, there's some really GL account codes here that are quite insignificant to discuss. Professional fees and meeting expenses. I mean, these things are going to happen every year. We have a schedule we populated as per the expenses that are appropriate for it. So I don't know really what you're going to get. Support services, benefits, salaries. If you want your wages to increase or meetings paid to increase, I suggest talking about that.
So travel,
Yeah.
there's 44,870 allocated to travel in 2021, and a surplus of 43,000, which is about the same amount. So I'd be curious to know, I mean, I'm looking for information. Staff actually knows a lot more than we individual directors do. In 2021, how was travel affected by COVID? We certainly anticipate that there won't be as much travel in 2022 as in 2018 or before. Are there any recommendations from staff of anything other than a totally normal travel budget going forward, which is what we have for all the 5 years forward is $45,000 a year, which so I'd like to know in 2021, how much, do we have any sense of how much of that travel budget was used? And perhaps we could decrease the requisition a little bit because we're not traveling as much. There's a first place to start.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to once again repeat that if staff had recommended a change, we would have brought it forward. We're not recommending a change. This is what we're recommending. If the directors want to change it, you won't have year-end numbers until a draft budget comes through in 2022. We've given projections. This is our recommendation. We don't have further recommendations other than this. This is what we're supporting.
Okay, so if, just as a innocent question from a dummy on a phone, if a director wanted to say change that travel to $20,000 as a number picked out of the air, that would be a director recommendation, not a staff recommendation, and it would have to be put forward as a motion, I would assume, by the director, passed by the Electoral Area Services Committee, and then it would go on to the board agenda. Is that correct? Someone?
Yeah, that's correct. Jim, could I make a suggestion here? Until we get the year-end statistic to know what actually totals were spent, we're just spinning our wheels even discussing this.
Well, I don't disagree, but, and I'm even more handicapped because I can't see it, what you guys are seeing, and I don't have those detailed descriptions that Director Anderson was given at her request, but because, I didn't even know to request them because what Mike gave me, I thought was, a pretty fulsome report of our budget. It's got everything that I usually see. It doesn't have those line items like I do recall seeing, in the print or the electronic version.
Yeah, there's two, Mr. Chair. Mike gives kind of a graphic presentation, one that's easy to read, if you will, and interpret. And then he also, when the budget's approved, gives a breakdown of the GL accounts, which is that thousands of lines of individual GL accounts. So
that's what you're saying, that comes forward later?
Well, it came forward in March, but we do two packages. They both say the same things. One's more easily to interpret. The other is in the weeds individual GL account codes, which is what we have pulled up here. Because if there's an individual item on there you want to discuss.
Okay, so that's what you guys are looking at that I'm not looking at, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And
so I'm sorry, I have to plead ignorance here because I can't see it, So
sure,
it's the limits of technology.
It's the stuff, Jim, that we used to see standardly, that all the information we had in those big budget binders that.
Yeah, I know what it is you're talking about. I know the pages, I know what they look like, and they go through line by line by line by line, every penny spent or every penny that comes in, et cetera, and it shows them over a 5-year period. And they're extensive, and that I don't have, so I can't look at it as you are looking at it now. So I can't even say, anything about it. Pardon?
What I'm trying to say, though, is that in last year's budget process, we never looked at this. We never got it.
It was always
Maybe it was
available to you.
Somewhere.
It was available to you all year long. That's not true.
What I'm saying is that it wasn't part of our budget discussions. It didn't come forward at EASC meetings or at board meetings. And it was available when I requested at the end of the year. I just heard either the CFO or the CAO say that it was created at the end of the year. And so what I'm requesting,
No,
and if it
no,
needs to
didn't
be in
say
the
that.
form of the motion, please let me know. What I'm requesting is that we see this level of budget detail at EASC for our 4 shared services and are able to have a substantive discussion about them at our meeting in January, when we have year-end information and we have surplus information. Because what I'm noticing just in travel alone, it's the simplest one, is in 2020, the predicted value, which I'm going to ask what that means, is 5,000, but the budgeted value was just shy of 45,000. So did we then, and we will know this in January, do we then have a surplus of, $40,000? Because I would like then to be able to recommend reducing the requisition by that amount or allocating it somewhere else. And unless we have this information in front of us, we can't have that discussion. And so
Okay,
I
so
would like
could I make a
if we can have
suggestion?
this level of detail in front of us.
May I make a suggestion based on your comments just now? They were very clear. Since I believe Dave or Tom or Mike said that we are going to get or have available to us that information in January, and we have an EASC special budget meeting scheduled for January, early January, I believe.
So, Mr. Chair, just to interrupt you there, the year-end draft budget with, again, year-end numbers and new assessments will be at the second meeting of the board, which is the 20-something. So that is the point where you'll see year-end numbers, what was actually spent, the surpluses, and how the surpluses are rolled into it. So it's not possible to get that before that point. And that's why these talks about substantive discussions about this is all just it's high-level direction that staff receive from the committee, because you're not going to see what those numbers are until the draft budget comes out. Now, again, these numbers in here are base numbers, and if the budget comes out and you see them and you want to make changes to the draft, then I suggest you would have that meeting after you've seen the draft budget.
Okay, so then you're suggesting that the EASC meeting be after the board meeting? Is that what you just said?
Again, you're going to have this information before the board meeting. So you could do many things, but what we have done in the past, we've given you the draft budget. You have it plenty ahead of time. You can see what these numbers are and how they consolidate, and you can address them at the board meeting, or you can have another meeting, or you can have 10. But you have plenty of time at the meeting. There's nothing prohibiting you when the draft budget comes out at that meeting to discuss these items. That's what the meeting is for.
So they can be discussed and possibly amended if necessary, either direction, up or down.
That has always been the practice for years and years and years.
Okay, so how do we not get in the same pickle that we got into last year? Because last year when EASC met in February, and the first time we saw the draft budget, because it was the first time that information was available on what had happened in the previous year. So it was the very first time that EASC saw the planning budget, for instance, in a draft form. We were told that it was too late in the budget cycle to make any substantive changes.
No,
and
that's
so
not true. You're not in a pickle, because 13 of 14 directors voted in favor of every budget report, so I don't consider that a pickle at all.
Okay, but I would really encourage any director or staff to go back and watch the minutes, which I've done a couple of times now, from our February budget meeting. And it's very, very clear that there was no opportunity for this committee to really discuss in a substantive way, for instance, planning, because when it was brought to us, we were told it was too late in the budget cycle. However, it was the first time we saw actual numbers.
And that's why
could I ask a question before you answer, Dave?
I'm asking the chair of the committee to schedule a meeting where we have the information and where the CAO doesn't determine it's too late in the process to have meaningful input.
The
Okay,
CEO doesn't
could I
determine that
ask-
at all, the board does.
May I ask you a question, Dave?
Mhm.
Okay, so having heard Director Anderson's comments and, you know, looking at logically at timelines that you're talking about, if the first time that we're going to see the final numbers that you're able, that's the first time that you're able to actually get them all and compile them all and put them together and present them to the board, it will be coming to a board meeting. So in order for us to have recommendations from the Electoral Areas Committee, it seems to me, and this is just my logic, it seems to me that we would have to have an Electoral Area Services Committee meeting with the information that you're going to provide to the board prior to it being provided to the board, so that if we did have amendments or changes or whatever, they could be made as recommendations, and then they would go to that board meeting, and then that board meeting would make a decision one way or the other. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, technically speaking, you only have 4 shared services in there. So if you need a special board meeting to talk about those 4 shared services and changes you want to make, you could. Or you could talk about them at the meeting when the draft budget is presented, because you'll have had a week to review the draft budget and look at what those amendments that you possibly want are.
But the full board.
I guess the
needs to make
problem,
sure-
excuse me, Nova, I still have the floor. I guess the problem that I see with that mechanism that you just proposed of doing it at the board table is that you're going to have 10 other directors that are not interested in talking about 4 electoral area shared services. So you know the deal. Come on, this is the same that we've gone through forever. The municipal I'll just call them other directors that are not EA directors, want the business of the EA committee dealt with that committee. So we would have to have a special committee meeting in that week, prior to the board meeting, so that we could come forward with coherent, concise recommendations to bring to the committee, to the board. Is that correct?
Can I make a comment, Jim?
Sure.
Thank you. Every year, staff brings a budget presentation to the Electoral Area Committee. That's the time that we can discuss this. We've got the draft budget at that time. I think the only thing that Nova didn't have at her fingertips last time was the ledger that's on the screen now. I mean, staff could bring that with them as well. Several years ago, we adopted a little different presentation format, but that old format still exists, and Mike can give it to us if we want. He can give it to us ahead of time and we can take a look at it. But we always have an electoral area budget presentation. So,
Okay, and that presentation would take place at is there a regular electoral area? I don't have my calendar in front of me. Is there a regular electoral area services committee prior to that late January board meeting that you're talking about, Dave?
I have to ask Mike if he would have the year end and the assessments for those 4 shared services available by that first East meeting. What's the date of the first East meeting, Tom?
Mr. Chairman, the the meeting for East currently scheduled for January is the 12th, which is, and the agenda will be going out 4 days after the staff return from the office closure over Christmas. I would leave that to Mike to determine how quickly he can prepare all that information. My experience is that, generally speaking, it's not even available that early in the month, but I will leave that to Mike to
just quick input, per the 2020 financial planning timeline, we had February 9th as the first budget discussion in the new year. As far as timing, we really spent a lot of the first part of January just incorporating the assessments and then trying to get everything kind of polished up to date, which brings to your question, Nova, what does a predictive value mean? We really start putting the budgets together and finalizing the final touches and everything else. I'm going to say, mid to mid-late January, and then we're kind of ready right near the end of the month or early the next month to really get going on the presentation. Once we get the assessments and everything in, we take a little bit of time here to review, polish, and then make presentations and everything else to roll out. So while it is tight, towards the end of January, I can definitely get the first iteration going.
Okay, so could I ask then, according to you, Mike, if the meeting that you're talking about, the board meeting that you're talking about, is in that, say, first week of February, then that's the same meeting that you would have been talking about, Dave, where we would adopt the preliminary budget or whatever. Is that correct?
I don't think it's
January.
Yeah,
sorry, it's not the end of January. It's the beginning of February.
Yeah, I think we go through a couple of meetings before we look at adopting.
Okay, but changes could be made. If it's into February, then it's possible that for the electoral area shared services prior to, say, the end of January, so that we would have time to look at them.
We don't get to these detailed sheets though until a little bit later. Usually it takes a long time to manually update our system for these numbers. So a lot of the times we go through the the first couple rounds of deliberations, and then we get this detailed up. But as Dave said, usually we don't look at changing. Travel budgets, for example, they were the same in 2017 as they are in 2020. So usually in the first couple, we put together the package, then we advise of all the major changes, that kind of take place for discussion, and then we kind of narrow it out, and then we really start to finalize and get the actual data going into our accounting system.
Okay. All I'm really asking, as sort of the general question is, and I think it should answer Nova's questions, is will we have an opportunity to amend whatever is coming forward to the board prior to it coming to the board?
As far as a budget amendment, I mean, that could be done 365 days a year. I'm not...
Like, what amendments are you talking about, Jim? Are you talking about shared services? We have 4 of them. The individual services we've gone through those.
Okay,
so
but
are we talking about 4 shared services? Oh,
okay, so those are the ones that Nova's talking about. Yes, Nova and Brenda. Those would be on the possibility list. But also, if there's things in the individual areas.
Well, you would have to get board support for that, because those would be single participant services. We'll have taken the input from the one-on-ones. We'll make a recommendation to the board, and if you wanted changes to those, it would have to be at a board meeting because the board votes on that. So not going to take individual services back to an EA meeting where the board votes on it, and after we've already done the one-on-one. So what I'm
asking though, Dave, I think you're not quite getting the question. The question is, if we did have a suggestion for any of those things in the individual services, they would have to pass through the electoral area services as a recommendation to the board, and then the board would look at them and make a decision one way or the other. That's
the purpose of the one-on-ones was to do that, to go through the individual.
I realize that, but if
the individual directors,
conditions change, sometimes things change, and one-on-ones happened a month ago, and if things changed between then and now, or then the upcoming time, and we want to make an amendment as individual participants, the only way they could happen, I'm just hypothetically asking you, the only way that they could happen is if the electoral area services recommended that they happen, and they went to the board.
No, you could do it right at the board. You don't need to have an EA meeting for that. If you have an individual service, when
You
there's a
just bring
draft,
it.
when, yeah, I mean, it's voted on by the board. It's a waste of time to bring an individual recommendation to East that has to be approved by the board after we've been through all these iterations. If you feel at, I don't know, January, February, March, whenever you want to make a change to an individual service, I would suggest you bring it to the board.
Okay, so on some of the items, like say there's an item in mine, which there is, where I want to eliminate $100,000 expenditure.
Well, I thought you were going to do that today.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. So I would do that today, make a recommendation, and then it would go forward to the board or whatever. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so that's fine then. I'm happy with that.
Okay, but I'm just hearing conflicting things. I heard our CAO say, don't bring recommendations to EASC about individual services. And now I'm hearing that's exactly what we're going to do.
We've already been through the one-on-ones. Why in the world, after we've gone through individual meetings with individual directors on single participant services, and we've incorporated those in the budget, why would we bring things back to East on individual services? I don't understand that.
And yet that's exactly what Jim is proposing to do, and I think you just said was fine.
No, he's proposing it right now. He's proposing it right now.
I understand. And the reason for that, Dave, is that in my experience and in my, what we need is a budget process that is iterative. So for instance, the one-on-ones in November cannot be the only opportunity to give input because we don't have all the information. For instance, the fire department, we had not yet received the budget from the fire department when we had our one-on-ones. The one-on-ones, in my experience, historically are a time to have an early, meaningful discussion with staff about things that we anticipate coming forward, and then staff can go and bring back answers. For instance, I said, hey, I'd like to know about how much it would cost to install some water tanks. Okay, so staff goes away and brings that information back. And then there needs to be another moment for me to be able to say, okay, well, that's how much it's going to cost. Now here I see the budget from last year and we have
At
this much surplus,
budget, you'll have it. And when the draft budget is presented, you'll have it.
The whole board doesn't want to go through all of these rural services and have all these discussions. And so that's why it has really worked well historically for those for those single participant, more detailed discussions to happen at EASC, totally understanding that EASC doesn't have the voting authority, but the discussion can happen there, and then recommendations can come from EASC and get adopted by board without needing to drag the whole board through all of those discussions. The board doesn't want to know how many water tanks may want to get placed on Cortez and how much they cost. That's something that we have been able to do at EASC very well, and I'm just asking that we do that again, rather than giving a director one shot a year at having everything figured out when that's not possibly the case.
Okay, so I understand your question, and it's been my question too, and Dave knows that, and I think other directors have had similar feelings that we don't want to have to be trying to drag the whole board, through the minutiae of our individual participant services. And so that's why we do it at the electoral areas, which Dave had just said, we will be doing some of that today. But whether we will have another opportunity or not is still, I guess, up for discussion. Dave has suggested that there will not be another opportunity to go to an electoral area committee meeting to make recommendations to the board, that we would just do it at the board. But then that, full circle that takes us back to discussing minutiae at the board table, which the board doesn't like. So, how do we deal with that, Dave?
Well, that's why we passed a resolution in September unanimously, all of us, to have 2 special EASC meetings in the budget. This is one of them, which may or may not prove to be fruitful because we don't have much substantive information. So my question to the CFO is, when would you recommend a date be set to satisfy the second of those 2 meetings as resolved by the board in September? after which the budget detail would be available after you've been able to do, year end. That would be a standalone EASC meeting, not with regular EASC business, and still in time to take those EASC recommendations to the board to make substantive changes to the budget. What would that ideal date be, Mike?
Yeah, that's kind of more of a question, but like I say, the budget is not all done by me. It's, we got a lot of staff involved and everything else. So, I think Dave would have to have a look at the applicable resources to get input. I could work as quick as I can, but like I say, all the underlying data and everything comes from staff on that one. But yeah, it does take me a while to produce stuff, but
and that's fine. I'm in no rush, Mike, at all. I'm happy to adopt the budget at the end of the March. I'm not in a rush to adopt it in February, but what I am quite attached to is to have a moment where we have the information we need and it's not too late to have a really generative discussion. And I'm asking what that sweet spot moment would be.
You'd have that discussion. I don't know why you can't have it any time of the year, really, for, a lot of these we're managing over, we got, 10, 15, 20-year outlook. So, like I say, if you have a thing on water towers, for instance, I'm not sure why you can't do that at any time of the year. And then we just either if you like the outcome of the discussion, you either amend the existing budget or we just kind of queue it up and put it in the next one. But every 2 weeks on the meeting, I'm there listening, taking notes, and then anything that does impact, I try and get that into the into applicable drafts. So
it's just, this used to be really easy. It feels really hard to figure out how to give meaningful input in the budget process now.
Yeah, but for me, like I say, the budget process is all year long, really. It's
okay, so if in 130 I want to say, hey, we're not traveling as much, let's reduce that item 133.20, where do I do that?
Right now, put a resolution up and get a vote of the committee members, and
but we don't have
amend
any
it.
information on how much we spent last year. So
Mike just told you have 10 years of data here. Like, things don't fluctuate that much.
In COVID, I actually submit that travel has changed a lot in COVID.
And other expenses have gone up.
Sorry, just to clarify, Nova, the actual expense would have fluctuated, yes, during COVID, but the budget hasn't been changing very much. So even if you look up what's on screen, yeah, we did have a surplus, and then the next year we added to the appropriated surplus just to try and balance out the requisition and keep it from dipping too deep, because any dips got to kind of come back. So, but yeah, last year was about 5,000. I think the actual, like, this was the amount I predicted in January. I think we were at 5,100 for the year last year.
For travel?
So suggesting that we'd put 45,000 in the budget doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to do. So why wouldn't there be a recommended change?
The reason Mike just explained to you, that putting in an appropriated surplus to make sure the budget doesn't have fluctuations year to year is solid accounting practice. That's why.
Yeah.
Did I say something funny?
I used to feel so empowered by this budget process. It was clear. The directors really had the opportunity to lead and get into detail and have great discussions. And I feel completely castrated and disempowered. And I'm doing my very best within this process to create more times, to create more space, to get more information. And I still just feel gaslit all the time. And so I could laugh or I could cry, and I'm just choosing to smile.
Well, we follow board direction, and we had 13 of 14 directors support it, so we're going to continue with that direction.
Clearly.
Mr. Chair, can we move on?
Yes, I was just going to ask Nova if she's okay with the numbers of questions that she has, or was there something else in addition to the discussion we've already been having before I moved on?
Let's move on to planning. Sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on. Was I the only other one that put an amendment forward? Brenda, did you have an amendment you put forward? I don't think so. It was just me.
I thought, Chair, we're still on the item 1, which is our shared services. Can we not talk about planning, given that that's the biggest thing that we do?
Mr. Chair, could we have a motion on the floor before we discuss something? I mean, we don't
Yeah,
know.
could Tom, somebody tell us what the motion is?
We don't have motions. If I think Joe was alluding.
No motion, Mr. Chair. It's been just discussion points that have come up, generally speaking, about process, budget process, opportunities for input, that kind of thing. But there is no motion currently on the floor.
I think Director Wally alluded to putting a motion on the floor if there was one.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we've had general discussions about process. I think we all understand the process, or at least we should understand the process. We've all done this for a lot of years. We just can't go on and on talking about vague general things without some motion on the floor. If nobody has a motion, let's hear it. Otherwise,
I'm happy to move on from 130. Clearly, we don't have information about travel or anything else there. So could we move on to planning 500, which is a huge deal for the 4 of us together?
You have a motion for planning, Bill.
It seems to me like we've got a lot of things to discuss. If we're not going to do long-range planning anymore, that would affect the budget. Are we therefore going to do anything else in lieu of that? What are our work plan items? That's not before us anymore. We used to be able to know what was on the radar for work. If we're not doing long-range planning, what are some of those? How does that affect the budget in front of us, the 2021 budget, which currently has a requisition of $560,000 with wages and salaries at $259,000. So is that going to reduce now, and to what, given that we are removing one FTE from that budget item?
We're not removing an FTE. We went through this at the one-on-one. We said we have an FTE that's not populated with finances, but we are not removing one. We have an approved position that is not populated with the budget. We came to you, the East, and asked if you wanted to populate that. East said no.
So could I, just out of stupidity, could I please ask, when you say it's not populated, does that mean that there isn't a number attached in the budget written down for that FTE?
Right. It's board approved, but the money to populate the finances for that position were not supported by East. So the budget isn't being reduced. What you see reflects what we have in the building right now.
Okay, so the money amount remains, but the personnel do not get hired.
Right.
Okay. Nova, what are you going to say?
I have a notice of motion that I'm just trying to put in the chat, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling to even find where the chat is. I see participants. Oh, chat here. So this is intended as a notice of motion, not a motion, and whether this committee wants to discuss it at a future time or it's a notice of motion that I could take to board, I don't mind. For your benefit, Jim, I'll read it here. It says, in the absence of the Strathcona Regional District's ability to comprehensively update its own long-range planning documents, and that being based on our lack of funding for the position that would be required to do that, including official community plans and zoning bylaws, as well as engage in other planning processes of value to our communities, such as transportation plans, housing plans, climate action plans, economic action plans, etc. That it therefore be resolved that the Regional District Board commit to 1, reviewing official community plan and zoning bylaw updates created by our rural communities, sending them to public hearing for community comment, and 2, adopting supplementary long-range planning documents as noted above, created by our own rural communities. That's intended as a notice of motion for discussion at another time, so I certainly don't want to dump that on you at the last moment. But the intention behind this is, if we are truly unable to fund our long-range planning work, and if communities want to take it upon themselves to bring forward climate action plans or transportation plans or updates to official community plans, which they deem really critical, that we will take a hard look at adopting them and updating our plans accordingly if we just don't have the capacity to do that work in-house. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm sure that if that's a notice to motion, then it will get discussed at a future meeting.
Point of order,
Is that
Mr.
correct?
Chair. I think the notice of motion should be specific to Cortes Island. I have no desire in Area D to review again our OCP, and like we do it all the time. It's a living document. We make amendments all the time to the OCP when applications come in and the zoning bylaws. And I love my original OCP, and so does my community. We don't want it to change. And
Okay,
besides
Brenda,
that, I mean,
could I just throw out here that any director has the right to make a notice of motion at any time, and
right, but this motion is
what, excuse me, that is what NOVA is doing, and the time, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but it seems to me that if the notice of motion is made, it would come forward to a future meeting, and at that time, Director Lee could say all of the things that she's saying right now.
I
Is
don't
that
even want to
correct?
waste my breath talking about applying a sweeping motion to all 4 rural areas, or 3 out of 4 of us that have zoning bylaws and whatnot. Well, 4 of us do. In parts of Area A, they have zoning bylaw, but and OCP, but I don't want to waste planning money on doing plans, because you know
Brenda,
what? Not even the director from Cortes follows the rules and follows the zoning bylaw.
Okay,
you know, what's the point?
Enough. That's enough.
Mr. Chairman,
Brenda, could I just ask our staff? My question was to staff.
You're correct, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so Mr. Chairman, under the rules that the board operates by, which affect committees as well, any director may make a notice of motion, and if it's not to be debated at the meeting at which the motion is given, but usually at the very next meeting, unless the director specifies a later date, it would typically come to the very next meeting for consideration. Okay. And at that time,
so
directors give their opinions as to whether it's a good motion or a bad motion or whatever. So that's
okay. So at the next meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee, whatever the notice of motion is that gets made would be on the agenda and debated. And at that time, Brenda, you can say all the things that you're saying right now.
I just object to Area D being hauled in with Cortes on
okay, but that's
what
fine.
they
You can
want.
do that at that meeting. You can say those things at that meeting.
I don't think she should be doing that at this meeting even. Like, it's not her business what Area D does.
I cannot I cannot stop somebody from saying something, okay? I can, bang the gavel and say you're out of order or whatever, but making a notice of motion is not out of order. It is appropriate, and we'll accept the notice of motion to be brought forward at a future date, and we can either, we can debate it, we can say it's a waste of time, we can love it, we can do whatever we want with it. Is that an appropriate comment, Mr. CAO?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Can we move on? Are you making the notice of motion or not?
You did.
Yes, I did, and I put it in the chat.
Okay. Well, once again, I can't see the chat, so if it's there and staff have it written down, then it will appear on a future meeting. And are you specifying the next meeting, or are you specifying another date?
I'm happy with the next meeting. I trust that it's best to come to East rather than board. I'm asking here It could go to board because it ultimately everything gets decided at board, but because this has to do with our planning function, I thought it only respectful and appropriate to bring it here. So if the chair and the CEO concurs, then it would go to the next EASC would be my request.
I would suggest as the chair that it go to EASC.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we have agreement from both staff and the chair. It will go to the next EASC, and I'm not sure if that means the next regular EASC, the next special EASC. This is getting really crazy.
No, we'll bring it to the next piece.
Okay, so that's the next regular EASC, which is in January, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a notice of motion, Mr. Chair, after this is dealt with.
I think this is dealt with, so.
Okay, do we vote? Do we vote on the notice of motion? Pardon me? Sorry, Dave, I didn't hear you.
Mr. Chair, there is no voting.
No vote.
It's a notice and purely that. There's no substantive decision that needs to be made at this point.
So it's just a matter of giving notice.
Correct.
Okay, the notice has been given. It is recorded, and we will move on.
I think
Was there another?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, sorry, just because I know you can't see, Director Lee, I think, had a notice of motion as well.
Yes, I was just going to ask, is it appropriate to do another notice of motion from another director when the other director another director had the floor discussing, I believe there were some other items, were there not, Nova?
Yeah, I've got my notice of motion that I'd like to put on the floor, please, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's do that and get it out of the way. Go ahead.
Notice of motion, and I'll send it in the chat. That the EASC committee confirm its support for not expanding staff in the planning budget for 2022, and that Electoral Area D is satisfied with the current OCP and zoning bylaw documents and procedures, and wishes to be excluded from Director Anderson's previous notice of motion. So that's to request that she cease and desist on all the preaching about other areas.
It sounds like 3 notices of motion to me.
No, it's half the size of hers. Doesn't deal with transit and all the other crap.
Okay, all I'm saying is that there are 3 topics in there. There's staffing, there's...
yeah, well, there's about 5 or 6 topics in Director Anderson's previous notice, so...
Okay. We'll just
let's be fair and allow Area D to take its own direction if I so wish.
Okay, as the chair, I would ask staff, probably being Edie, have you got the notice of motion noted?
Yeah, Director Lee put it in the chat, so we do have a written one.
In writing.
Yeah, so appreciate that.
Okay, so it's in writing.
And this is for the EASC committee.
Yeah, so there's Mr. Chair, again, sorry, because I know you can't see. So both Director Anderson and Director Lee's notice of motion are in writing, so we have it.
Okay, they're both there. They will both be at the next EASC.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, back to the agenda. Was there a further comment, Director Anderson?
Not that will be of any use.
Okay, so you're done.
I'm just gobsmacked that we're not discussing our planning function at EASC in any substantive way at budget discussions. And I hope that we can do that in the new year, in the early new year, before everything gets finalized.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a little question that I would like to have, well, clarified. I know that what we're talking about today is based on last year's budget, and I know budgeting is our best guess at what we're going to, what kind of revenues and what kind of expenses we'll be looking at next year based on previous history. I know that it's just a framework document at the moment, but we are doing substantive amendments to the 2021 budget at the board tomorrow. There's proposals to fold in all the grants and all the last minute changes that have happened in the budget.
No, if I can, Director Lee, we're not really those what you call substantive changes. We have to amend the budget. For example, Sean has been successful in acquiring a lot of grants.
Yeah.
So all we do is so they're
Fold
not
those
really they're not there's zero requisition changes. So they're substantive, I guess, in a number, but not there's zero impact to the requisition or the taxpayer.
Yeah. Because I feel like when I looked at that report that's going to the board tomorrow, I thought, the bottom line total is like a $46 million operation that we have at the SRD. It's huge. And Mike has done an excellent job on the financial plan that he's presented. I mean, it's absolutely
Okay, what is your
solid.
question?
Well,
Brenda?
I just feel like we should be having more high-level discussions about how things are handled in the electoral area budgets. For example, what concerns me is that I don't seem to grasp in the budgeting documents and figures, like where are all of our reserves at? Where is Area D's gas tax reserves
Okay,
at?
you're getting into details,
No,
Brenda?
I'm gonna just say as an overview, I would like to know how we're going to handle how we're going to handle surpluses and reserves and how they're being applied. Because what's going on with Area D anyway is that I have substantial gas tax reserves in Area D.
Once
And
again, Brenda, we are getting into
yeah, but
details.
I want to know that as a statement from the electoral areas as to direction, what our direction should be for any extra money that we have available. How are those reserves and surpluses going to be applied? Are we going to look at simply reducing requisitions? Are we putting them into reserves for equipment, or
So Director Lee, at the one-on-ones, that's what we went through, the reserves, the surpluses, and the gas tax amount, kind of getting your direction and giving our input on what we feel is appropriate for those. So we provided those. And at the draft budget, again, you'll see Mike has provided summaries of surpluses in all the budgets. Reserves as well, and gas tax reserves. So all that information is available to you, but we took your input from the one-on-ones and the single participant services on direction for reserves.
Okay, well, I didn't notice substantive reserve reports in there on the services, but I wanted to just say that last year, I think it was, or maybe the year before, I had the board support for putting $1 million from the gas tax reserves into replacing aging water lines.
Right.
And then I noticed in my parks budget that, the parks function in Area D was taking gas tax reserves to do projects in the parks. And that's really not Area D's priority. Area D's priority is to use gas tax reserves to repair and replace the water system in Northern Area D, and to help out the Black Creek Oyster Bay when we can. And that's water is the main focus for me. And so I'd like to have a little bit more, I don't know, control over that.
Well, we went through the parks function with you and identified the capital projects that had.
Yeah, and I did say that at the meeting.
Yeah,
I did say it at the meeting. I said,
if I could interrupt here, please, as a chair. Dave, I have to say that I think probably what is happening here is that there is not a clear understanding or feeling that the one-on-ones were what directors expected. And if that's the case, then we're arguing in circles. around the same thing. And it really doesn't seem to necessarily be a possibility of solving anything at this point. And perhaps one of the things that we could look at as an electoral area committee and staff is look at how we do the electoral area planning budget, whether it be the shared budgets or whether it be the one-on-one budgets, but that we be very, very clear on what it is we're talking about, what information we need, what we want to do, and when we do it. And I think if we had, I guess, a word from you that said, okay, we'll do that next year, fine. I think we'd probably all be okay, and we would not be going through these detailed discussions on pieces of an individual area's budget.
Well, Mr. Chair, in respect, we did go through all the gas tax reserve, the capital project.
Oh, I know that.
Surpluses on each individual service, one-on-one with the director. I'm not sure what more it could do. Everything Director Lee has said, we provided it. We went through the graph. We went through each budget. We identified the reserves, the surpluses, the capital project. I'm not sure how more finite you can get on that.
Okay, well then let me just say that since it doesn't seem to be clear from what I'm hearing at this end, without looking at a screen, but talking on a phone, what I'm hearing is that there's uncertainty out there, and if there is, it sounds to me like the best way to solve it is to have a nice, calm, quiet conversation amongst the directors and staff as to what's expected from both ends. And then we can go from there. And, I'm not asking anybody to make any decisions about anything right now. I'm just saying that's a suggestion to staff as to how we might do a more satisfactory budgeting process for the electoral area directors. And, take it for what it's worth. If you think I'm, completely off track, fine. I don't mind. But what I'm hearing over and over and over again here from so far just two directors is that there isn't clarity. And if there isn't clarity, then, I think we're all adults and we all have specific skills, and I'm sure that we can figure it out, I would think. A lot of things are very clear, some things aren't. So maybe we could look at that as a future discussion. Could we do that?
For the chair.
Pardon me? Sorry?
For the chair. You want an agenda item on it? Put it on an agenda item.
Okay. I'm just, like I say, I'm just trying to keep the peace here as the chair, and so far it doesn't sound like we have peace. Okay, Brenda, have you made your notice of motion? Is it done?
Oh, yeah, it's done. It's on there.
All right.
That the East Committee confirm its support for not expanding staff in the planning budget for 2022, and that the Electoral Area D is satisfied with its current OCP and zoning bylaw documents and procedures and wishes to be excluded from Director Anderson's previous notice of motion. Or you could just leave that last phrase out, but I think it's okay because it refers directly to what Director Anderson's trying to do in her motion, which is all areas.
That's all I needed to know is, did you make your motion? And it's been clarified. You have made your motion, and it's been accepted as a notice of motion for the next EASC. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next item on the agenda would be moving to business items. Is that where we are, Tom? E?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that would be the next item on your agenda for today.
Okay, so E1, electoral area A items. It says no items to review. Is that to the director, Gerald? Is that still applicable?
That is still applicable.
Okay, so you have no items to discuss whatsoever for area A.
Nada.
Okay, that was easy. Okay, item 2, electoral area B items. The note is all the shared rural services and other associated budgets, planning, EA, admin, etc. Is this counting as number 1 that we moved into the adoption of the amended agenda? Is that what this is?
That's correct. I did not share that line with you for area B. That was my understanding of the purpose for the whole meeting. But if we're going through individual areas, I don't want to belabor, but I'd like to know from staff if we're going to get answers to some of the questions that I asked in the one-on-ones in a timely way so that I can give substantive changes, i.e. the fire department. I asked some questions around how much things would cost. I gave some initial direction that said, if A, then B. So when would be that appropriate next step to have the next step of that iterative conversation around the single participant services on Cortez? Because I'm hearing it's not really at EASC and I should just bring it up at board for a change, but that would need to be after some discussions with the fire department and or staff. Just for instance, in that service, I had some other questions around parks and other things. So I'm confused now in our new budget process, how we do things. And Dave's going to say it's not new, but it's not my experience.
Okay. So we will just leave it at that and move on.
There was a question there, so I'll just be super specific.
Okay, so what was the question again? Sorry.
For instance, and there were a number of these, but for instance, in the one-on-one, I said, hey, I'd be into amending the budget and putting in a bunch of money for water storage. Could Sean go away and find out how much it would cost? And should I talk to the fire department and etc.? So how then do I get that information? Because the one-on-ones isn't the only moment to give all direction for the year. How then, when some of that information comes back, what is the appropriate moment then to amend, for instance, the fire department budget, which is a single participant service?
Well, I guess when the fire department submits the budget, if we don't have it, I mean, we don't prepare that budget. It's a budget that flows through us. Like, we fund it, but we don't prepare it. We have no role in creating that budget. So
no, I'm talking about our budget. The fire department submits a budget, which is a portion of our overall budget for service 250.
It's a healthy portion of that. I mean, it's the most significant portion of that. Like, if
and then we do capital acquisition, and then there's reserves, and then there's admin, and so my question, for instance, with the water tanks is, do we have the authority to put water tanks on fire department land or school district land or crown land and own them, and how much would they cost? I'm interested in putting that into the budget, but I don't have a number. So when Sean and the fire department get back to me with something, when is the moment, just in terms of the budget process, for me to say, hey, I'd like to make amendment to 250?
Well, I suppose when they have that information for you, I don't know where Sean is at that. So,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
On this, and that is being looked at. I as well don't know when all of that information will be available, but when it is, it will be reported back probably through the EASC, because it was a question asked during the budget discussion. As far as the fire department's budget, yes, the regional district has its own budget through which we fund the fire department's budget. And I believe we simply, in the absence of anything specific from the fire department, we simply add a COLA amount annually in anticipation of costs going up for certain items. So That's typically been our approach in the absence of specific direction.
So then that item would come back to an EASC meeting prior to the board adoption of the whatever's brought forward. Is that correct?
I would assume that is the case. If it was a legitimate question that was asked during the EASC meeting, then yes.
Okay, thank you.
Process.
It was a question asked during one-on-one, and I'm hearing different things that we should either, it will come back to EASC, or alternatively that I should just bring it up at board and it's not EASC because it's single participant. So that's why I'm asking, what is the moment to address updates to single participant services in this budget process?
Well, we're still working on what the answer would be, so it's difficult to say what meeting. So do you have another one? Like, is that your only one?
No, there were a number that I brought up in one-on-ones. I don't want to drag the whole committee through them. I'm just trying to not miss the moment in this budget process to give you input.
But we took that input and we're going to embed it in the budget. So I'm not understanding
I
the
asked
problem.
questions. I asked
but if we
questions
don't have,
and there
if
was
we don't have
information to come back. So I didn't give final input because it was dependent on information that we didn't yet have, and that was the case.
right, and we said we're
for a
still
number of
working
items.
on that, and we said we're still working on that. The other ones, if there's not questions to be answered, we'll embed them in the budget.
And sorry, could I jump in there for 1 sec? Yeah, so
Go
with
ahead,
fire,
Mike.
so with fire, we just heard it was that was the input, or my notes from the session is we had they just verbally told us it was a 5% increase. So that was the only change. The other thing we discussed was it looks like they're in with a they have some larger capital purchase coming down the road. So there's decision there to add 10,000 of a capital draw for the next 3 years. So I already have that embedded in the budget. Come the meeting in the new year, if that appears and we get the new assessments in and everything, if that appears too rich, for example, that would be the opportunity to knock down that the reserve content. You would have another chance to edit that 10,000, or maybe the assessments go the other way and you want say 15 instead of 10. So speaking to that, and that was the only other change. The only thing else we charge in there is support services, which is a bit of a COLA. And then there's some property insurance. And then that was the only thing that was significantly affected. Big percentage, it was 42% increase, but that's only $252. So other than that, there was no major changes. And then, yeah, you did have the water study, which I haven't heard from. But so just to recap, it's like I say, I embedded those changes. And then when we produce the next budget document with all the new assessments and everything, if that data is too rich or you want to change it, that would be the spot. Does that help in any way?
Well, my memory is what I said is I would be willing to put up to $10,000 in the budget for the next few years to come, subject to that being something that we determine is viable for us to do, and that we could actually buy tanks for that amount. So there's a level of iterativeness here that that is needed.
Yeah, the 10,000 wasn't related to tanks. It was related to Cortez's fire capital purchase. But like I say, we didn't actually have the budget. So, but that was the big change there, was just the $10,000 increase for the reserve for the next 3 years. And, like I say, if that is, too much or too little, you would just, make a motion and we would change it before the budget's actually finalized.
Okay, so there is an opportunity there to change those numbers if necessary.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, numbers change like through all the years. If you guys are having a meeting in May and it comes to light that there's going to be a change in service level that'll have a change in cost, we either amend the budget for that or incorporate it in the next year's budget. So, but I say, I mean, the budget changes throughout the year, correct?
And a question on the first responder that has come up since our one-on-ones. I was speaking with the chair of the fire department board, who is also the one who deals with the first responder. And we had put a number, and Mike, you and I had an email exchange about this, and some funds, I think in the order of $13,000 or $15,000 into reserve that they thought was going to be available for them for training and seemed to not be. I don't want to get lost in this level of detail with all of us if we don't have the budgets in front of us. But I do need there to be a level of open discussion between directors and staff for a couple of months throughout the budget process. So maybe I'll just circle back with you on that, Mike.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, is that it, Nova?
Sure.
Okay, so that was electoral area B items, and then we're on to item 3, which is electoral area C items. Would you like me to step down from the chair for this? If so,
Sure.
Okay, so I'd ask Brenda if you could please
Take the
chair
chair.
this following.
Okay, so we
one
have,
item.
Thank you. So we have electoral area C, and Director Abram, can you describe your items?
Okay, so there's a number of things here that have changed. As I had mentioned before, that things change. Some things have changed since our one-on-ones and our previous board and electoral area service committee meeting, because now everything that is publicized, either you can view it or listen to it or see it in written minutes. The numbers of questions that are coming to me on a daily basis are becoming absurd, and I can't answer them. So the reason I can't answer them is because I have no idea what the answers are, and I'm not going to make it up. So the first one I have to ask, with regard to Granite Bay Park. The question is still coming from 34 homeowners, property owners, wanting to know why I have not had the lights removed from the wharf at Granite Bay when they were never directed to be put in by the community or the director. And all I can say to them is that they were put in according to a previous staff member that's no longer with us. I believe we've had 2 since then, and including the one that's there now. And people want to know, what did they cost and why are they still there? And if this is something that I need to budget for to have them removed, I'd be more than happy to make that budget adjustment for 2022, just so that can be taken care of. This is a very political issue in the northern part of the island.
Yeah.
Through the chair, please.
Yeah. If I can
Mr.
answer.
Leach.
So the lights are an operational safety and liability issue that we don't consult the area director with. We have many operational issues that are non-political. That the lights at Granite Bay were a decision by staff and the contractor to address safety and liability, and so we did that. So there is no consultation with the area director. We have dozens of those operational decisions through all our services throughout the regional district constantly, and we don't consult the area director with that. So that money was spent. Year-end numbers again will be available in January if folks want to look at GL codes and what their what the cost of that work was. We have made amendments as a result of feedback we've got from the community in terms of reflection and dark sky, timers, brightness of the bulb, etc. But if you want to direct staff to remove something that we put in as a result of a safety and liability issue, you're going to need to make a motion that's brought to the board.
So do you have a motion, Director Abram, regarding
Yes, well, unfortunately, I can't show you the motion because I don't have the access to the chat,
Okay.
but I can tell you just the gist of it, and that was basically that when this first came up, if I could just back up for a second, and this isn't part of the motion, when this first came up, it was not a liability issue. We have not received anything from anybody in the way of MIA related people or otherwise to light that dock. And this was strictly, and this comes directly from the people that were involved in the Granite Bay, Canish Bay area, that this came from one person to our contractor who lives in Granite Bay. And then he brought it to our staff person, our staff parks technician, and it just snowballed from there. But there was no direction because we have had those docks in place for more than 20 years. And we have had dealings with MIA on numerous occasions over those docks, over many issues on those docks, and we have always received a passing grade. So I don't believe that this came from a complaint from anybody other than this one person who wants to walk his dog at night on the dock, which, you know, that's what flashlights are invented for as far as I'm concerned. It is a complete destruction of the night sky and the whole area of Granite Bay, Canish Bay, for people that moved there because of its remoteness. This is a remote park. And as a remote park, I don't believe that it's required by anybody to have the liability issues. The liability issues that were talked about were ladders, and that was dealt with. They were built, and that was to enable people that if they fell off the dock, they could get out of the water. So they've got, I believe, 2 ladders that were constructed. But the lights were not part of that necessity. They were just an add-on. So, you know, I would like to make a motion that in the 2022 budget, that the investigation of removal of the lights at the docks at Granite Bay Regional Park be undertaken, and that if necessary, the appropriate amount of money be budgeted to remove those lights.
So you're making a motion.
Do we have a seconder? Is there a seconder for this motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded.
You're making a motion, if I can, Director Abram, that you want an investigation into this. The board supports an investigation.
Yes, I would like to know, like from start to finish, why we have lights there and how do we get rid of them.
Can you repeat that motion? I've got up to Granite Bay Regional Park.
Okay. What did it say before Regional Park, or before the?
So I have that the 2022 budget, that the investigation of removal of lights at docks of Granite Bay Regional Park be
Undertaken.
Yeah, be undertaken and appropriately funded.
Thank you.
So that's a 22 budget item, I would assume.
Well, I'm not sure because you've asked for an investigation, so we'll bring.
Well, I meant what I meant,
yeah.
Dave, if I could finish. What I meant by appropriately funded is, you know, staff time is funding, right? So if there's funding required out of the parks budget or whatever to do it, then I want to make sure that, yes, I'm willing to fund. If you don't think it's necessary, I'll leave that phrase off.
Yeah, so this motion will have to pass by the board.
For clarity as the seconder, I'm assuming this is just internal staff looking into the matter, not some external investigation.
That's all I was asking for. I would like to see the paperwork that suggests that we had a libelous issue, and if so, the cost and work that was done. I'd like to know that because that's what people are asking. How much is that costing us?
Regional Park, B, this is so small, it looks like ant droppings, be undertaken and appropriately funded. So is there any more discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed to the motion? Carried. Okay.
Thank you.
Next item.
Okay, the next one was, Dave, this could be just a question possibly. We talked about fire pumps a number of times. You've told me that the fire pumps for Evans Bay, which is a park, that will be taken care of out of community parks, no problem, 10 grand, I think it was. The question that got asked, and you told me that, I would get an answer back at some point. We were assuming at the time, you and I both were assuming that we could use the Transport Canada money that it sits in each of those accounts at the other divested docks, which would be Surge Narrows, Owen Bay, and Port Neville, that we would be able to use the money from those accounts to fund those 3 fire pumps for the docks. And then at a later date, I believe it was that he didn't think that it could be. And then you mentioned, I believe the same meeting, this was all just talk. It wasn't, there weren't motions or anything. You mentioned that whether it comes out of there or not doesn't matter. We can probably do it from gas tax money. The caveat was that because those docks were, I believe divestiture was funded somewhat with gas tax money or federal money, that's what it was, that it was federal money, and you weren't sure whether the stacking issue applied in this case. So I have not heard back yet on that as to whether or not, other than the conversation we had the other day where you said, don't worry, it'll be done. Well, I need to know where it's coming from.
I think Wolf has this all. Yeah, I think Wolf has it all sorted out. So let's just pass it over to him because I think he's got direction here.
Okay, fine.
Through the CAO to the committee, that thank you so much, Director Abram, for your request. So I have answers to you. Let me just start with the funds that we receive for Transport Canada. So what we have done is we have conducted inspections, assessment to this, and we determined that we have funds to actually supply couple of wharfs, Port Neville and Surge Narrows with wharf pumps. So we're right now in the process of getting quotes from suppliers to see what's available as well. And there is one more report that we're waiting for, which is Owens Bay. At this point, I won't be able to determine if we have enough funds to actually buy a pump. And with regards to your question about looking into gas tax, there was an answer that came from SRD Finance confirming that we're not allowed to actually access gas tax funds to buy any of these pumps. So that responds to 2 out of the 3 wharfs that you have questions in for pumps, and that includes accessories as well that are needed to actually operate the pumps.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if I can,
thank you very much for that, Wolf.
Evans Bay, Director Abram, you wanted that fire pump to come out of Parks budget, right?
That's coming out of Parks, that's correct.
Okay, so we got
and this
3
is
out
the
of the
reason
4 covered here, I think, right?
Okay, so this is the reason that I'm asking about it is if there isn't enough money on the Transport Canada dock at Owen Bay, if you determine that the funds that are left are not enough to cover the cost of the pump, then I would like to increase. I don't imagine I can do it from my parks budget because siloed, it wouldn't be allowed. But I could do it, I think, as either an economic development or a grant and aid grant. Is that correct? If I could just top it up with that money. The reason I ask that is because if I can, or if I have to, I should say, then I will need to increase my grant and aid budget.
Could you remind me, do we have those 3 TC wharfs in a service?
No.
Well, they kind of hide under the Electoral Area Administration umbrella at this point because they do not
Right.
have a service of their own.
Right. So Director Abram, we brought this to you many times before, is that these wharfs, TC, Transportation Canada, as you know, as the condition of the funding, requires us to have a standalone service from them. They cannot go in parks. The only landing spot we have right now is under the Electoral Area Services, which that is a shared service budget. So any liability, the other 3 directors should know they would be paying for that. And we have brought this to your attention many times that this needs its own standalone service. It's required to receive the funding. And if you want to supply equipment to one of these wharves, you need to establish the service, requisition money for it, and have that service pay for it. Otherwise, the other EA partners are contributing to it. And they're liable.
If I could ask from the chair, when these wharfs were divested from Transport Canada, the Comox Strathcona district had a wharfs function, which electoral
No, we didn't.
which
No, we didn't. I'm sorry, I was there, Brenda, for 9 years.
well, they had a wharfs committee.
Yes,
and
we had a
they
wharves
decided
committee.
on whether they were going to take over these wharfs from Transport Canada. So I thought there was a wharfs function.
There's a
If I could
condition,
explain.
Director Lee, there is a condition, though, under receiving the money from Transport Canada that a wharf function is to be established. So because Director Abram has not supported that, all financial risk and liability is shared with all the EA directors under that.
And I have already confirmed that I intend to work with you in this coming 2022 budget year to establish a wharves function for all of the wharves, to put them all into one, and that would take them away from the Electoral Area Administration. And it has been like that. It has been in Electoral Area Administration for a couple of years, but there has been no cost to them. This is the first time there has ever been a cost to anybody because the Transport Canada money in the bank has been enough to cover anything that needed to be done. So if this is not enough to cover Owen Bay at this particular time, which I'm sure Wolf can figure out on his own, and when he does, then he can let us know and we can go from there. But in the meantime,
I think he's already said there's not enough money there. And if you want a fire pump,
he said there might not be enough money.
I'm pretty sure there's not enough. What you need to do is establish the surface, provide a requisition, and buy the pump out of that requisition.
Or ask the Electoral Area Administration function to fund the extra couple of $1,000, because we're not going to be talking much money here. There is money in Owen Bay's pot. I saw the breakdown. It just isn't quite enough. It's close.
Yeah. You're correct, though. You will need the support of the other EA directors. If you want a motion for that fire pump to be paid out of EA admin, then you're going to need a motion, because I need support from the other EA directors that they're going to pay for a fire pump in your service.
That's a bad precedent, Jim. We don't want to do that.
So
okay, that's fine. We can just leave it at that for now. Then
would you need? You're just going to skip it? Then it just stays status quo, and the other electoral area directors are paying for stuff, right?
Yes.
No.
So they're at risk for liability for sure. Transport Canada said that if you don't establish the function, they're going to take that money back, and the liability remains with the other EA admins. So what Director Avon needs to do is support the creation of a wharf function and fund it.
I've already told you that I do.
So would that be through feasibility?
We brought it to the budget last year, and you voted it down.
That's because you included all the parks wharves also, and I am adamantly opposed to that. These are the only three that need to be in a function. The others do not. So,
Well, Municipal Affairs doesn't agree with that, but anyway.
well, that's not the information I have. Okay, so that was fire pumps and
So are we
leaving,
going to have a motion dealing with establishing a function for fire pumps and budgeting for them?
not at this time, Madam
It
Chair.
would be nice. Well, if it's not directorly, we will continue to leave the service in EA admin.
But what if that's not okay with other electoral area directors? Because we didn't even know we were paying for this.
Right, then you should make a motion, I agree.
Madam Chair, may I counter what our CAO has just said, that you have been paying for these. You haven't paid a cent for any of them, and you never have. So since we took them over, I would like to see the clause that says that we are required to have a function, or they're going to take the money back. That's what you just said, Dave.
There's a condition of giving us the money that we establish a service.
You said that the condition included.
Condition of giving the money is establishment of a service. If you don't establish the service, you've breached the condition of the funding. Similar to Area D and the dike function that we brought to Brenda, Director Lee, that she supported, is that they give us money and they give you money conditionally upon establishing a service. We're going through the same type of thing with Area D, and we're establishing that service. So it's a condition of the funding. There's just no question about it. I don't know how many times we can tell you the same thing.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that during the budget year of 2022, that we shall investigate establishing a wharves function for Port Neville, Owen Bay, and Surge Narrows.
Okay, have you got that, Edie?
Nope, sorry, I was just getting set up to type it. If you can say again.
Okay.
Okay, you ready, Edie?
I'm ready, go.
Okay, I would like to move that in the budget year of 2022, that we investigate the instigation of, or the establishment of a wharves service for Port Neville. It's got two L's in it.
Hang on 2 seconds.
Comma.
A wharves service for Port Neville.
For wharves at Port Neville, Neville,
Yep.
comma, Owen Bay, comma, no, not comma, and Surge Narrows.
Okay. So I have that moved and seconded. Does everybody understand the motion? Is there any further discussion? I think we've had a lot of discussion, and I thank you, Director Abram, for doing that. So moved by Director Abram, seconded by Director Wally. GW. Okay. Question on the motion I'm calling. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next one is a community parks item, not parks, but.
Director Abram, might make one comment here. Did you skip the first one on your agenda? That was about a wharf, 5,000 to 4,000.
Yes, I'm sorry, I did. I amended it. I cut two things out right at the beginning, Gerald, and then I just went to Granite Bay Park Wharf lighting.
Okay, that's fine.
I thought I should just deal with the most important ones right here and now, and then get rid of them. Community parks, the playground at Blinken Park. Okay, now that's been on, it's been a line item in the budget for 2 years. There was never any discussion whatsoever with me as to whether or not we needed a playground, what we wanted the playground to look like, et cetera, nothing. And it was done by the same person that did the lighting. So I am asking that I'm making a motion. The motion is that the line item under Community Parks, Area C, for $100,000 be removed from the budget.
Okay, it's moved. Seconder?
Second.
So, Madam Chair, if I can just speak to this before the committee votes on it. So it's pretty standard practice in terms of when applying for grant funding that you need to show in a 5-year plan that you have actually you're planning for something. This $100,000 is just a placeholder we've been moving forward. It's not requisition, it's not gas tax, it's not anything, but it's an indication of support when we apply for a grant that it is in our 5-year plan. Removing it from the budget will identify that we have no plan for any parks improvement. And therefore, it is fairly typical these days on applications that they want to see support in your financial plan and that you've been working towards the plan. Removing this is clear indication that we have no plan or intention, and therefore it will inhibit any opportunity we have in making a grant application.
Okay, and if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I understand what our CAO has said, but since we all know that we can amend the budget at any time, we could very easily put another amount of money back into the budget for a playground that is definitely not going to be in the range of $100,000. There would need to be a new RFP. I don't believe there was an RFP on this one, but it was being done anyway.
No. This is nothing more than a 5-year plan placeholder. It's unfunded. There's no real money in it. It's a placeholder in a 5-year plan. That's it. It would be, in my mind, a foolish move to remove it, as you just inhibit yourself in any opportunity for future free money.
Okay, Madam Chair, I am not going to argue with our CAO, but I am going to tell you that from his staff, I was told that this piece of equipment was going to be ordered from a company in Richmond, and the only thing that stopped it was that they couldn't figure out a way to ship it. Okay, if that's the case and it's true, then it's a little more than what we just talked about. But I am willing right now to just say, forget it. Leave it there, placeholder only, and at the time of a grant possibly being, opened up by one of the senior governments or UBCM or somebody, then we will be able to show, yep, we've been trying to get this for 3 years. Does that make you happy then, Dave?
I'm just trying to pass on advice. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just a number we put in a plan. It looks that we support it and we're planning for it. But again, it doesn't cost you anything. I can't understand why you would remove a placeholder. We have many of them in all of the budgets. We have millions of dollars as placeholders, as Director Lee knows, in Chestnut Garden. We'll put $30 million in there to identify support.
We don't need to go into all those details. Thank you. So
Madam Chair,
that's withdrawn.
Just a sec. I have, sorry, Director Abram, you were saying something?
I would like to withdraw the motion.
Okay.
If the seconder agrees.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay,
Thank
the
you.
motion is withdrawn.
Okay.
Aniko, do you still wish to speak?
I just wanted to please, Madam Chair, thank you so much, provide one point of clarity here. This project has never moved forward. We have never ordered playground equipment. We've never explored ordering playground equipment. There was never an RFP process. This item has been identified in our asset management plan. There's been an assessment done on the structure. It is rotting. It is in need of replacement. The item has always been in the financial plan as a placeholder over the last 2 years, only in the event that we would come up with some sort of grant funding to allow us to proceed with that project. So I just wanted to provide that point of clarity. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll move on to your next item, Director Abram, tennis court.
Next one is a tennis court. I believe that's been taken care of, Dave, at 10 grand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that came through the one-on-ones, and we have that in there.
And the ICSP funding, I believe you clarified the other day that we couldn't spend that $20,000 that's left over on anything but a consultant. Is that correct?
Yeah, a consultant to complete the plan.
Okay. And can that consultant be, could I be so bold as to ask if that consultant could be hired from the Outer Islands? Because that is a major portion of this.
Yeah, what we'll typically do, because this funding, I'm going to assume is attached to some provincial procurement requirements, we will adhere to those requirements and then bring back a recommendation if it's beyond the staff's authority to approve it. So I'm not familiar with what conditions that funding may or may not have, but again, if there's somebody local that wants to submit a quote on it, we're happy to receive it.
Okay, so that would require some research on your part to let me know whether or not you can do it through a procurement process under one of your senior people or one of yourself or whomever would have to do it. I know you have different levels.
Yeah, it's whether the provincial attachment to that funding has any procurement limitations. Okay. If not, again, happy to support anything local. Okay,
that would be great because, as I said, like this plan was supposed to be for Quadra and the Outer Islands, and the Outer Islands are the ones that are bugging me the most about this because of the fact that they don't feel that their input at the one meeting that was had by the consulting group, that they don't feel their input was reflected in that. So I have to, I just take that as input and I'm passing it on. Okay, the next one is the Harper Road pathway. This is something that I would love to see, a purchase order for the work that's been done. We've spent $50,000 of $70,000, and I think we've completed about a 16th of the pathway. I had the entire pathway completely lined up as gratis from community members that own excavator companies, gravel pits, landscaping companies, trucking companies. They were all willing to completely do their portion of the path, and it could have all been done in 1 year. In fact, they wanted to do it all in that 1 year because they were all slow that year. And that was a few years ago. I did notify Aniko of this, and I think she'll remember this. I told her that I had, all these people lined up, and I believe I was told that I was not to be, that it wasn't up to me to come up with volunteers or whatever for a community project. Well, that's the way we've done everything else on Quadra, the Granite Bay, Hoskin Channel, Lucky Gym, and Lincoln Park. They've all been volunteer. Some of them have charged you, and then you've given them back a tax credit. I'm not sure how that all works, but somehow you've done that. But anyway, that particular item cannot be asked more times by this community of me as to what is happening with that pathway. And it goes on top of our sewer right-of-way, a 10-foot wide sewer right-of-way. And I have not heard a word from anybody concerning where is it at with the permissions that were needed. We had two ways of doing it, either permissions from each property owner or have it declared, since it's for utility use, a pedestrian pathway would be considered a utility use, if it would be considered a utility use. And if so, then we didn't need those permissions from those people. If we do need the permissions, where are they? I'd like to know, because people in the area, they're willing to go out and put pressure on those people to give the permissions to get on with this, because they need that pathway. Harper Road is the most unsafe road on this entire island, and it gets lined up with ferry traffic to the point where there's only one lane on a two-lane road, and people going both directions have to use that lane. And just sometimes it's impossible. There have been accidents. There have been police involvement. Flag people have to be hired during the summer by BC Ferries. So it's really, quite crucial that we get this done. And so I would like to know, so that when people ask me, how has the money been spent, and can we move ahead with the volunteer donation type work to get it finished, because people are anxious to have it. So that's, for this point, I'm just going to leave it as a question, because I know there's a lot of questions in there. I'm not going to make any motions other than, I guess I would make a motion. I would like to see, I would move that I would like to see the purchase order for the work that has been done to date on the Harper Road pathway, period. And that's public information. I'm sure you've got it on the website. You can just point me to it.
Can that be a direction to staff from the director, and just, does it have to be a motion?
Well, I don't know.
I think that the staff could provide you with that without making it a motion. That would have to go through committee and board.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'd agree with that, Director Lee. There's Director Abrams given us quite a bit of detail, and I know Aniko has an answer for it. So I'm not sure if you want to spend that time here or.
No, we don't need to spend it here. But if we can do it as direction to staff, and you can give me that information, I'll be perfectly happy.
Annika will provide that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, there were two items that are in. They were talked about in the one-on-ones, and later on it came to me, why are they in one-on-ones? The parks inventory, first of all, I believe, we used to have what was called, I believe it was something, Brenda, you'd remember it probably, something like the Campbell River Regional District Parks Plan, or something like that. And it included all the parks in our regional district, which was the CSRD at that time. We, of course, split. That probably changed. But if there is to be a parks inventory, should it not be a parks inventory that comes out of some general function? That would be my first question. The second one is on asset management. We passed, I believe it was last year, maybe it was the year before. Time flies. I was out of commission for 2 years, so I'm kind of losing track here. But should not asset management be an asset management situation out of the asset management function? How many computers do you have? How many desks do you have? How many parks do you have? What's in the parks, etc.? Is that a logical question, or is it out of line?
I think Aniko can answer that.
Aniko?
Thank you, Madam Chair, to Director Abram. The asset management plan was done under that function. However, each individual function with assets are responsible for ongoing, maintenance of each of those assets. So this is an outcome of the overall asset management plan, but specific to the parks function, which is why it's funded from there, similar to any of the other assets, say at Strathcona Gardens or something like that, where they need to do inventories or assessments on the status of each of those pieces of equipment for asset management purposes. So to answer your question, this is the first time that we've done an asset management plan and had these outcomes noted. So this is likely why you haven't seen it before, but we feel it's appropriate that when we're inventorying assets for particular functions, that those functions pay for that inventory.
So it's all compartmentalized in between all departments.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, that was my last question. I have some other items, but I believe they're more appropriate for just a regular EASC meeting, which I will leave them for. So I'm done.
Okay, you done? Okay, I'll turn the chair back to you then, because next is Area D.
Okay. All right, so now we're on to item 4, E4, Electoral Area D items. And it said see attached list. I don't have that list on this screen. It will not show up, but there was a Word document. So you're going to have to tell me, somebody will have to tell me which items are, 1, 2, 3, 4.
I sent it to you on an email, Jim.
No, I know, but I can't access my email.
Oh.
And I cannot get Teams to come up. And my email keeps telling me
okay, I'll just read out
cannot send message and cannot receive. So I'm hooped as far as electronics.
It's okay. It's okay. We've got it up on the screen and
we can read it out.
Yeah, exactly.
I can read it out to you, or I can type it out in the. No, you can't even see the chat.
No, it's all good. All good.
Okay, so my view of the budgeting process is more. It's larger scope than looking at line by line items like the previous two directors were looking at specific items. I'm just looking at the process, and I just want to know that there are financial controls on access to Area D's gas tax reserves, and that they should be part of the budget process. So where I had, a few years ago, $2.2 million in gas tax reserves, I don't want it to be like accessed by parks if I have directed that we're going to spend $1 million of it on water lines and water system improvements, and that's one of my main projects. I'd like to see, I'd like to be able as a director to say, look, as a priority in Area D, we need to get this water system in Northern Area D, we need to get it up to speed. And we've been doing that, and the staff, Wolfgang has just been amazing. He's put in these universal digital meters. It's going to change the landscape on how much we'll be charged, because we'll know minute by minute how much water we're using, and we can't be overcharged on the 50-year-old rusty meters that Campbell River supplied. So we've got backflow valves. We've done improvements to the line system to take out loops, and there's been lots of work that Wolfgang's been leading, and I have lots of confidence that if we keep going with the improvements to the water lines, setting an engineered report forward to start replacing them, that's going to take a lot of the gas tax funds that we have, plus the universal metering on each home. If we get that grant coming up, then there's $660,000 we have to come up with to match that one. And I don't think we can use gas tax for that, can we? No.
Directly. I have a quick, easy answer for you on this. Is that we actually have a bylaw in place. The SRD has allocating gas tax funds, and so an important line there that you're probably interested in says before any funds approved under subsection 1 are committed from an electoral area's allocation, the written consent of the director representing that electoral area must be obtained. So we have a bylaw that ensures consent.
I've never signed any bylaw to direct that the gas tax funds in Area D be used specifically for one thing or another, though. I just noticed.
Tom has a consent form that we've had EA directors. Gerald just signed one the other day. Yeah.
Because I was just a little alarmed at how much money was going out of my gas tax funds for parks when, you know, I mean, parks are important in Area D and people love our parks. But we really need, I mean, it's not a luxury item. We need to fix this water system up, and that's a high priority. So
yeah, just so you know, staff don't have the ability to independently allocate gas tax funds for an electoral area.
Okay, so that one's covered, Brenda. Can you move on to item 2?
I like to.
Now this one, I'm sorry, but I did just manage to I found in my Word document folder your piece, and number 2 about increase fees and charges for building inspection. I don't believe that's part of this meeting. I believe that would be part of a regular EA meeting.
Area D.
This was supposed to be for budget.
Yeah, it is for budget. Area D has, Area D supplies building inspection to people in Area D, but we also contract to the smaller communities like Tassus and Zabalis, Seward. We contract our services to them. And the maximum we've ever had from any of those communities, well, the total we got for all 4 of the communities that are receiving our building inspector was $12,000 a year. And the fees have never been reviewed or like they've never increased as far as I know.
No, we do.
I just like them to better reflect the cost and also the applicants, like when you're building an Area D, I'd like to see the building fee charges better reflect the cost of the service so we can lower the dependency on tax subsidization on the tax requisition, because that was always when Area D was involved in building inspection in the Comox-Strathcona area. It was the philosophy that fees were, you know, that the service would be largely funded by building inspection fees rather than the general public. And I'd like to see us move towards that more to make sure that the fees are reviewed and brought up to lower the tax requisition.
If I can, Mr. Chair, we have done a review of our fees and charges for building permits, and we are in line with Campbell River, the Comox Valley Regional District, and the City of Courtenay. And on top of that, every year we review the fees and charges that we charge the member municipalities for that service. In fact, we charge over 100% of the service to them to cover our admin costs. So they're reviewed every year. They're updated and allocated to those. So any services that we are providing, we're collecting more than 100% cost recovery to those member municipalities.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll move on then, but I'm hoping that the building inspection fees will be reviewed this year. Approval requirements for parks works plan in electoral areas to ensure that work priorities in the work plan are aligned with community aspirations. In consultation with the electoral area directors, and that fees and charges for park use rentals are based upon hourly charge, and that these fees are reflective of the community's value stroke cost of providing the service. And so this is regarding leasing out or renting out our parks to outside user groups or people outside of Area D. We don't want to just give them carte blanche, use it as long as you want during the day, and, you know, displace all the park users that are paying taxes for that park for the entire day. Start up generators first thing in the morning and run them all day long. It's just, I mean, we've had incidents at Higgle Park this summer that generated a lot of complaints from local residents that they felt their park was being commandeered by, you know, by a group from outside our community who just had the park from 7 in the morning till night, running
but
generators.
Brenda, I believe you've stated the case, and your motion on number 3 and that from there down is what you're speaking to right now. Would you like to speak to from number 3 to
from and that? Move that fees and charges for park use rentals in Area D parks are based upon an hourly charge, and that these fees are reflective of the community values cost of providing the service.
That's a motion?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could provide a bit of clarity here, please.
Okay, could I need to get a seconder first before I take that. Is there a seconder?
Well, Mr. Chair, before I was to second that, I would like to know how you're going to monitor how many hours you're charging for.
Well, in the lease agreement, when they apply for a park use.
Wait, Brenda, wait.
I think Aniko can clear it up here.
If we're not going to get a seconder, then let's go ahead and have Aniko tell us what she has to say, and then I'm either going to get a seconder or move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the park use rentals, this was brought forward to the area director a number of years ago from staff requesting that we explore park use permits. The area director did not support that recommendation, and at this time, there are no park use permits for any electoral Area D parks. Any events that occur at Higgle Park are unsanctioned events. The staff did not approve any event at Higgle Park this summer, whether it be the large event that you're referring to or any small birthday party that happens 3 days a week. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
And I would like to just say that if that being the case, that's fine. That was then, and this is now. And if the director now has decided that she wants to do a fees and charges for park use rentals, then I guess that the motion should be that staff explore a fees and charges bylaw for park use, et cetera, et cetera. That would be a more appropriate motion.
Yeah, I could second something like that.
All right, I would like to put that forward because I feel that if some, you know, I feel that if the park is being used exclusively by a large group who's from outside of Area D's tax base, they need to pay for the service.
We've got that. We've got a mover and a seconder. Is there any further discussion on a parks use and rental fee bylaw?
Can you please clarify what the motion's going to be?
The motion is as printed from and that, just before, and like take out and that, and in front of fees, that staff explore a bylaw for, and then the rest of it.
For park use permits. I thought we had park use permits. I thought we have a limit on, like, it can't be more than a certain number of people and in our parks master plan.
we're talking about the motion right now. Are you
Yeah,
happy with the motion as I just,
yeah, at least it's on the radar of the staff and they can bring it forward.
okay, and Edie, do you have it?
I do. Director Lee, can you just look at what I've got typed on the screen and make sure I've encompassed everything?
A bylaw for park use permits for rentals of our parks that are based upon an hourly charge,
Okay,
and that
slow
these
down.
fees of our parks, you could put in area D, because I'm not talking about quadra parks or any other parks, just in area D, that are based upon an hourly charge, and that these fees are reflective of the community's value stroke cost of providing the service.
Second.
Okay, have you got it, Edie?
I do, thank you.
Is there any further discussion on this?
A question?
I have a question. Oh, Director Anderson first.
I'm just
Melba, go
trying
ahead.
to rack my brains for the memory of this because it came up for Cortez Parks as well. And my memory was that what was brought forward applied only to very large gatherings that on Cortez we deemed probably wouldn't ever really happen anyway. And I remember there being some comments from Director Lee or concerns about sort of a rave that would have been happening on the Oyster River area. I'm just asking if staff can jog our memory on the scope of what had been proposed and had those special event permits in parks. Did we apply them anywhere?
Mr. Chairman, I can advise that those are in fact regulated under the special events regulation that the regional district has, not under parks regulation.
I'm thinking of special events. So what is being proposed here then is specifically to parks and would be separate than the special events regulations we looked at. Is that correct?
That's the way I read the motion, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I may, that is correct. And Director Anderson, when that was brought forward, we advised that that we were limited currently to that special event permit, which I believe is triggered by 1,000 attendees. And it was staff's recommendation that we explore other options for both special events permits and park use permits, just for clarity. Thank you.
Okay, so it's like the staff and the director are in heated agreement. Can we please move
Can
on?
I just ask though, for clarity? So there could be a special event in a park that we want to have the same conditions that we have under special events permits for non-parks. And the incident that happened that Director Anderson was referring to was called an atmosphere event under a huge circus tent along York Road. And they had anticipated 5,000 people coming and camping there and eating there, and a music festival and whatnot, and drugs and alcohol. And we wanted in our permit all the things that would protect the public from, the negative outfall of such an event. And I'd like to see the same kind of thing if there was a special event in an Area D park. I'd like to see those kind of rules applied, like that they can't move in with generators and put up bouncy castles all over the park and just dominate the park for the whole day.
Can I make a suggestion, please?
Yeah.
Could we just leave it to staff to understand what it is you're talking about? You want it for parks, but in some situations, you want the special events criteria to apply. And if that's the case, perhaps the wording of the bylaw can be such that it will be this if it's parks, it will be this if it's a special event within a park, and let them figure it out.
Okay. Yeah, because the event that I'm trying to address that happened that I'd like to see corrected is it was a special event in a park that completely overran the park.
Sounds great. We've got a motion. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 4. That each electoral area director be enabled to provide feedback to planning on whether applications are aligned and in compliance with the community's mission, vision, and values contained within each area's respective OCP. Are you
Right.
moving that as a motion, Brenda, or what?
When I wrote that, actually, it was before I read the board agenda for tomorrow. And Josie Osborne, Minister Osborne, has come out with amendments to Bill 20, it's called Bill 26, which is loosening the guidelines on what has to go to public hearing and what doesn't. So, but I still think electoral area directors should be consulted about whether they feel that the applications are in compliance with their community plan before the board decides on whether to forego a public hearing or not.
If I could please ask for clarification, Dave or Tom, it was my understanding from reading that that was enabling legislation. It was not prescriptive. Is that correct?
Well, I'll just, I'm going to first answer Director Lee's question in this, and then Tom can answer the legislative team. Electoral area directors currently provide feedback on applications when reviewed at each and board meetings. This presumably includes their perspective on each applicant's alignment with the community visions and goals. The regional district is not able to solicit the feedback privately. The board would have to delegate this authority, which would create a huge legal liability that I really doubt they would engage with. So the A director is provided opportunity to provide that at committee meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Tom can answer the legislative one there.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that Bill 26, and like I wrote this before I read this stuff on Bill 26. And
Sure.
So I wasn't sure how that would pan out. But I do feel that there shouldn't be any sort of staff making decisions on what the electoral area wants to do, whether they want to go to public hearing or not.
So,
Tom,
Only
can
make
you-
recommendations. Staff only make recommendations.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, would you like me to address what is in Bill 26?
I would really like you to just, if you can, tell me whether or not it is enabling or prescriptive.
Mr. Chairman, I would say probably neither, and by that I mean what is proposed to be done is that the requirement for a board to pass a resolution to waive a public hearing on an application that complies with an official community plan, that is being changed to now say that in order for an application that complies with an OCP to get to public hearing, you have to pass a resolution to make it so. Otherwise, it is automatically not going to go to public hearing. So that is essentially the change that is happening.
So basically, that is what we are doing presently.
No, it's
is
the
we
opposite.
go through all of the readings and then we make a motion that says, and that we proceed to a public hearing on, December 10th at 7 o'clock at the Quadra Community Center, and directors Lee and Abram will be the blah, blah, blah. Is that not?
No,
is that not?
It's
The opposite.
It's the opposite.
Is that the board has to make a motion to send something to public hearing consciously. It isn't an automatic.
No, that's what we do right now. We make a motion. It's usually like, A, B, C, D, E. That motion sends it to public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about the waiving of a public hearing. Right now, the board wishes to not have an application proceed to a public hearing because it complies with an OCP. Right now, there has to be a motion passed by the board to basically waive that requirement. What this legislation proposes is that that requirement will be waived forever for all of those types of applications, unless the board makes a motion to take it to public hearing. Those will not automatically be proceeding to public hearing.
Okay, and what I'm saying, and I don't think anybody's getting it, is right now, if we have a bylaw come before us and it meets the OCP and whatever, and it goes through first and second, and then the next motion is to give it third or whatever, and then we say, and to proceed to public hearing. Is that not a motion that you're talking about that says the board must pass a motion to make it proceed to a public hearing?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I do believe there are some similarities, but we must keep in mind we're talking about applications for proposals that comply with an OCP, not other kinds of proposals, just those kinds of proposals. So the fact that the board does pass a motion regarding the public hearing is usually to time and place, that kind of thing, but it's going to the public hearing right now, unless that is waived by a resolution of the board.
That's
yes,
right.
Yes, there are details to be worked out. That's usually the subject of the motion. But if the question is whether or not to send it to a public hearing, right now that can only be waived by resolution of the board. What I'm saying is Bill 26 proposes to automatically have that happen unless the board decides that they wanted to go to public hearing. These will never
Okay, and
not go to public
we
hearing.
as directors, can we as directors of an individual electoral area say, as an omnibus motion, that all amendments to our OCP or our zoning bylaws must go to public hearing?
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about applications that already comply with an existing OCP. We're not talking about anything that amends an OCP. So,
Okay, so I'll change it to that comply or do not comply with an OCP, that they all must go to a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I think then rush into some wording. If there's confusion or lack of clarity about what this is doing, recommend that perhaps a board tomorrow, a subsequent report might be asked for that basically outlines when this would apply and when it wouldn't, rather than to rush into some wording right now that you might live to regret. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and so the reason I put it in here, it does affect budget. I mean, it would affect, it's quite expensive to hold the public hearings and to anticipate that we're going to go to all of them. That would be an indicator that the budget needs to reflect that. And like, I support going to public hearing. I don't support anybody outside of the public making a decision on land use issues in the place that they live.
And that's what
I support going to public hearing.
If I may, as the chair, what I was saying was, I absolutely agree that we should be going to public hearings unless we waive it. So I am opposing the Bill 26 amendment. And what I was asking was, can we, as a board or as directors, say, in my area, all applications, whether they meet the OCP or don't meet the OCP, shall proceed to a public hearing. If I told our community that we were not going to go to public hearings and that myself or my staff or my board was going to decide whether or not it was a good thing for that application to go to a public hearing, there would be absolute rebellion. People want to be able to say, we said yes to that development, whatever, or we said no to that development. They do not want it to be said by anybody else. And I totally agree that we should have the right to waive if it's a stupid, simple little thing that means nothing to anybody, as far as, changing changing their lifestyles or whatever. But everything else has an impact. And if it has an impact, it should be going to public hearings. So I disagree with my good friend, the minister.
Mr. Chairman, this is in fact going to be the law of the land. What the board could do is, and I believe there will be further regulations surrounding this issue that will be enacted in the future. So there may be an opportunity to have a policy that guides the regional district internally as to which ones should go to public hearing, notwithstanding that they don't have to, that kind of thing. But at this point, I don't think we have enough information to be able to make that judgment.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. I know that the intention of the minister was to try to cut red tape and make applications proceed quickly in order to provide more housing for people more quickly. That's what she wants, is housing. And I think that her new policy would be more suited to the municipality, the larger municipalities, rather than the rural areas, because we're not supplying like massive amounts of housing anyway. That's not the nature of our areas. So it doesn't really apply to our rural areas anyway, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see how they define the regulations. I don't know when they're going to come into effect. Like, I don't know when her new Bill 26 becomes effective. But it will affect our planning budget for sure.
Is that known, Tom, when it's going to be enacted?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the bill has received royal assent, but I'm not sure that all sections are actually operative at this point. There will be further regulations, we're told, that will outline circumstantial issues related to these changes.
Okay. So we're going to deal with it tomorrow, and it should be a very interesting meeting.
Good.
So what is it you want to do here, Brenda?
I wrote that before I saw the report on Bill 26. So my stuff was just discussion on that, not doing anything with it. Like, as a matter of policy, I think the rural areas should continue to take all their applications to the public, public hearing.
Number 5.
Summary of legal cost. I'm requesting, it's just direction to staff, a summary of legal costs being attributed to each electoral area budget in the 2021 budget. Clarification from staff as to electoral areas, each of our financial contributions to those legal costs.
So that's a pretty easy one, Mr. Chair. So when we get year-end numbers, obviously, and the draft budget comes, you'll have the consolidated 2021 expenses. Local Government Act requires all legal costs attributed to a service must be recovered from that service's budget. So we have 3 forms of that. We have a board distribution, if you will, which we allocate out. I think Area D is around 10%. We have the shared service. So if a legal cost comes out of a shared service for the EAs, I think Area D is about 41%. And of course, if there's legal costs that come directly out of Area D, that would be 100%. And all those numbers will be available in the draft budget when we consolidate year-end numbers.
Okay, so when you say each electoral area attributed to, so say Cortez's legal costs would be like charged 100% to Cortez?
If they were attributed full 100% to that service, it depends what the matter is.
Well, we've been to court like a 3 times for Cortez. So would that be paid by all the directors or just by Cortez?
So it depends what the matter is. I don't want to speak about in-camera matters, but
no, me neither.
Again, it depends on what the legal matter is. If it's 100% attributed to that electoral area, 100% of the cost. If it was not in just the shared service, it would be divvied up amongst the four. And if it's something that the whole board pays for, then we divvy it amongst all the participants.
Yeah, and
So-
I can't clarify because it is in
Sure.
camera, so
Sure. Wait
I
till
just generally
wait till you
wanna
get the
know.
year end. Yeah, wait till the year end numbers, and if you have a question about a specific legal item, just give Mike a call, and he'll let you know what that item was and what the costs attributed to Area D were.
Okay. So for example, the one that isn't in camera right now, at 3753 South Island Highway, the
Right.
one with that had the fire and
Right.
is still appears to be living in that house with tarps all over the roof and
Mhm.
windows boarded up and whatnot, still
So I
appears
believe-
to be ongoing.
I believe that is shared amongst the four EA directors. And
Okay.
and so I don't know what year to date. Maybe Mike knows the year to date number right now, but I believe it's shared. So you would be 41% of whatever's spent on that.
Okay. Okay, good. All right, that's good. So then number 6, function control.
You leave that. So that's shared between the electoral areas through administration. Is that correct? Electoral area administration? That would go to staff?
Through the chair to, well, through the chair to the chair. Depending on which portions of the legal costs are being enacted at that time, the cost would either be charged to a specific service that may be single participant, in this case, a building service, or the shared service for bylaw enforcement, which all actually fall under 500 planning. But so in the case Director Lee is referring to, either likely bylaw enforcement, which is shared, or building inspection, which is single participant for Area D. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Aniko. So the reason I asked was because we talked about the wharves being billed through a shared service for a couple $1,000s, and there was a lot of objection. And now we're talking about major legal costs in one electoral area that's shared between all four.
Director, even though you have had your fair share, I would say, of bylaw enforcement issues brought to the board in 2021 as well.
Have I?
Yeah, you've had a number of
Like old rusty boats and stuff that needed to be towed away, stuff like that.
them.
Okay, yeah. If we only we could get it happening. Number 6, is that what you said, Brenda?
Same with me, like the burnt out house is still being occupied. So all the
Number-
court stuff.
Number 6.
Okay, function controls. That every service created at the SRD that affects our electoral area finances will be created by function with maximum requisition limits and requiring the participatory signed consent of each electoral director prior to the requisition being applied, which has been standard practice at regional districts around the province. And for years, it's been that way. And what I'm getting really panicked about at our board is somebody has some bright idea. They want to build a building or supply a service outside of Area D, and Area D gets charged for it, and Area D has no benefit from it. So I have a hard time with those. There's no function establishment before money goes into these things, such as the home, what started out as home away from home, or this new proposal for a paramedic to fly around in a helicopter from Campbell River Airport, or which is coming up at the board tomorrow, or just, just these expenditures that Area D gets charged for, which is not serving the people in Area D.
So, Mr. Chair, there's a simple answer to these. So all functions created through the Local Government Act have to have a max requisition limit, and so I don't know what to say
So,
about
but
that.
we didn't create a function for home away from home, did we?
Yeah. And there is
And
one.
so
Great.
didn't
And
the
just
directors have to say if they want to participate or not?
so we're a regional board, it's a regional function, so it's a vote of the board. So we do not, just to finish your question there, the regional district has no legal authority to require or solicit electoral area consent to requisition before it's applied. So we're a board, it's a board regional function, board votes on it, and there's no legal authority for us to go
Well,
to
we
the
always
individual.
used to have the option
No.
of opting out, and we used to have to sign consent forms from each electoral area director before we were towed into a service. And if we
would have
don't have
been,
any controls on that, then anything that anyone dreams up that they want to spend a lot of money on, we just get towed into it.
well,
And
we're a board, and
well,
it's
the
a
board
regional.
is not functional if it's doing that.
So
It's a
all boards have
dictatorship
that
if it's doing
authority.
that.
All boards
It-
have that authority,
It's
and that
not a
has not
democratic
changed.
board.
Yeah.
One,
Well,
one person at a time, please.
anyways, that hasn't changed. That's been the Local Government Act
Well,
for
I think that
years.
it should be,
And
I think it needs
and
to be set up by function and to offer the directors representing different jurisdictions on the board the opportunity to opt out. Because otherwise, other members of the board are just raiding our tax base. That's my opinion.
sure. Okay, next one.
Um,
I think,
So
Mr. Chair,
dams and
if I may
dikes.
just jump in here, I think this is really an item not for financial planning, but something that the director may want to bring up at the board. If he's asking about, a board resolution for UBCM, I'm not sure it's financial planning.
Yeah, this has come up since, all the floods and disasters that are happening around the province, and in consideration of, the fact that rural areas, sometimes they don't have the tax base to be able to properly handle the orphaned dikes and the potential flood damage costs.
Brenda, I'm going to interrupt.
Okay.
I believe Dave is absolutely right. This is not part of our financial planning for this year, this coming year.
Well, there is talk about putting.
Excuse me. It is certainly absolutely critical item to talk about electoral area services. It's something that I'm keenly aware of, and all of the dredging that was divested and the dikes that were divested and all of that through my work with the federal government, and they're ignoring their responsibilities. So this needs to be brought to a higher level, but not at this meeting. Okay. Let's do it at our next.
There is some discussion has happened at my single service meeting about establishing a function for flood control in the Oyster River floodplain. And that would require a new service. It wouldn't be covered by the Oyster River Bank Protection Service. And so what I'm alarmed about, and maybe didn't reflect it very well in this motion, is that seeing other rural communities around the province experiencing the costs of trying to remediate all the damage from a failed dike or a failed dam. They don't have around BC, and that would include Area D, we don't have the resources to handle those costs. And so I'm sure it'll come up at UBCM, it'll come up from Princeton and Hope and Merritt and places like that. But it does concern me that, right now we're on the hook for all these costs. Area D we did reinforce our dike a few years ago, had an engineered plan, but I mean, what happens if that dike got breached? You know, could we handle the disaster that would follow if that happened? So,
All right, get into that conversation at a future meeting.
okay,
So
so that's
That-
it. That's it from me.
that's the end of the electoral area D items. We have no closed session. The next order of business is termination.
Jim, just prior to termination, I just have a question with regards to voting options at our next East budget meeting.
The next East budget meeting, you mean the one like in wherever, end of January or whatever?
Yeah, and simply that I remember in previous budget iterations, and I know we've done many practices over the years, at one point, each shared budget, you know, planning, EA, admin, et cetera, would get a vote of support from the whole East committee saying, yes, we support this draft budget going forward. Doesn't seem like we're doing that right now. So it is the base budget from previous years that is the default unless there is a motion supported by a majority of 3 to amend. So my question is simply this: because we are 4, if a motion is put forward to make some amendment and supported by 2 of us, and not the other 2, then it would fail. And so I'm just realizing we might be in a position whereby the majority doesn't support the budget because the default is something that never gets called into question about whether we support it or not. And I'm just wondering if that's the case.
Well, you're asking the wrong person, but I believe I asked a similar question of Dave earlier before the meeting about the voting structure on the, I think you said the shared services were just EA and the single participant services were full board. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so my question is specifically about the shared EA one. So for planning, for instance, if I put forward a motion saying, you know, I want to render it to 0 or double it or whatever, and one person supports it and the other 2 doesn't, we then have a situation where the majority of us neither support nor don't support something. So I'm just trying to clarify, would we then default to the base budget that we approved last year, which may or may not be supported by the majority of EASC?
I'd have to ask staff for that answer.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can advise on the voting matter, and that is without question that motions can only be passed by a majority. So if it's 4 directors, you need 3. You can't get 2.1, so it's got to be 3.
I understand.
And in the absence of a motion being carried, then whatever was proposed to be changed by that motion or replaced by that motion or whatever continues to live on.
I understand that, but I think what we're not doing this year that I see is asking for the majority of us to support a budget. And if that question is never called, then we will always default to what we all thought was a good idea last year. And I'm just wondering what the intention of the chair or staff is in this matter. Are we intending to call for majority support of the budget or only of amendments? Because it might mean that at some point you never get majorities, you never call the opportunity to see if there's majority support for the budget.
Well, as the budget as a whole, that's all we actually ever call for as staff. When we present a budget, I mean, everything leading up to it is planning and committee's recommendations. But when it comes to the actual budget, all we actually ever call for is majority vote.
Well, of course, and that budget that hits the board for a final vote in entirety gets made up of all of these individual decisions that happen at one-on-one and staff recommendation and various committees. And so there has been an iteration of the budget process where the joint service, say planning, we are asked, does the electoral area committee support the base budget for planning? And then if 3 or 4 of us say yes, then great, it carries on. But if that question is never asked, I'm just noting
Well,
that we
the
may or may
board,
not ever get.
yeah, the board has adopted a process where it's base budget. So I think your answer is it defaults to the base. Yeah.
Thank you. It's just not always been the case. Wanting clarity. Thank you.
Okay, is that it now? Can we go to termination?
I just want to say one thing. I think this meeting has been very useful, even if not all of the discussion has resulted in resolutions that are going to move forward to the board. But the discussion is really useful because it sort of frames where some of the directors are coming from, including me, and you know, gave us a lot to think about and to discuss. And I think it's been very useful. It's good that the staff here, that the electoral area directors want to be involved in decisions affecting their areas. We want to be more involved with, you know, these budget decisions. And I think it's been a really useful meeting. And I thank the chair for taking the initiative of calling the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. Well, we've got one more shot at it in another meeting, and that will be after Christmas. So anyway, I guess we'll all be together again tomorrow. Hopefully I'll be on Teams by then. Maybe I can get, is John still in the building? John Schmulin?
Yeah,
I
he's here.
I believe
Okay.
John is currently out.
After we terminate, if you could.
He
is it
might be at
possible-
lunch.
Pardon me?
He might be at lunch. I don't know. But I saw him here this morning.
Oh, okay. I thought John said he was there.
No.
Okay, yeah, he's probably at lunch. I'm sorry. All right, well, I'll phone him back later and see if he can join into my computer and figure out what's going on.
Okay, move termination, or have we already?
Nobody moved it. Now it's
Move
moved.
termination.
All right. Anybody opposed to that? Good. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience in dealing with this hybrid Teams meeting with phone and on screen. And hopefully, yes, we did get something accomplished, I think, and we'll move on. Tomorrow sounds like it's going to be way longer than a full day's meeting of all the things that are on there. All right. Talk to
Okay,
you
see
later.
you tomorrow.